Good afternoon. The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to consider H.R. 1968, H.R. 1156, and H.J. Res. 25. First on the docket is H.R. 1968, the Full Year Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act 2025. This legislation helps avoid the government shutting down and allows us to continue our work and service to the American people. The House must act to avoid a needless shutdown that serves no purpose. By doing so, this body can put its focus and attention on the next appropriations process. Our work must continue. Next, we'll turn to H.R. 1156, the Pandemic Unemployment Fraud Enforcement Act, a must-pass piece of legislation that Congress has a duty to address here and now. H.R. 1156 establishes a 10-year statute of limitations for criminal prosecution and civil enforcement actions related to fraudulent unemployment claims funded by federal pandemic unemployment programs that were created via the CARES Act. The unprecedented expansion of unemployment insurance during the COVID era opened the floodgates to fraud, and we have a duty to hold the perpetrators of that fraud accountable. American taxpayers are counting on us to do the right thing and right this wrong that has gone unconfronted for many years. I invite our Democrat colleagues to join us in doing the right thing for the right reason and pass this legislation, and to put aside whatever grievances they may harbor towards an administration that the American people entrusted to be their voice. It's a worthwhile opportunity and one that you do not want to miss. Finally, we'll turn to H.J. Res. 25, a Congressional Review Act resolution that overturns another imprudent midnight rule issued by the Biden administration that targets decentralized finance brokers and threatens the viability of the digital asset ecosystem. This rule was issued a mere 2 days after Christmas, a belated and unwelcome gift that absolutely nobody asked for or wanted. It is akin to a decaying and outdated tin of fruitcake. In addition to being stridently unconstitutional, this rule is in direct violation of the Administrative Procedures Act and yields excessive latitude to the IRS to exceed its authority as usual. And when the Senate passed a similar version of this bill last week, 18 Democrats joined Republicans in voting for it. It is a truly bipartisan piece of legislation. With that, I look forward to today's discussion, and I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We stand just 4 days away from a government shutdown. So let's be crystal clear about who's running the show here, because some of my Republican colleagues seem confused. Republicans run the House. Republicans run the Senate. And the White House is a Republican-run circus led by Elon Musk and Donald Trump. You guys talk about winning by a landslide. You talk about having a mandate. Well, that makes this very simple. If the government shuts down, there is no mystery about who's to blame. No excuses, no spin. It will be because Republican dysfunction and Republican extremism got in the way. And if we are being really honest here, Republicans have been trying to shut the government down since Trump took over. Trump's Office of Management and Budget tried to do that last month by unilaterally freezing all federal spending. When the American people pushed back, Republicans realized they had shut it down. Republicans realized they had to shut it down more covertly. That's when Trump gave Elon Musk and Doge unprecedented power to sabotage the federal government, letting them hack into agencies and dismiss thousands of critical federal workers. And now it seems like you all just want to shut the government down the old-fashioned way by not doing your job and failing to fully fund it. The continuing resolution in front of us today is just more of the same. You're trying to gut programs people rely on so you can give more handouts to billionaires. I mean, this CR goes after support for our veterans. We know veterans have been fired through Doge's purges, And we know that Republicans want to fire some 80,000 people who help take care of veterans. Now Republicans are using this CR to gut funds for veterans exposed to burn pits, Agent Orange, and other toxic substances. Another big middle finger to veterans. Republicans have already fired Social Security Administration workers. This CR would make it easier to fire more of them, meaning that when seniors call for help with their Social Security check, they're going to have to wait even longer to get a real person on the other end to help them out. And I can't believe it, but this bill defunds police. This bill takes away from law enforcement, firefighters, and EMTs in D.C. Wild, coming from the party that couldn't resist meddling in D.C.'s local laws last Congress under the guise of concern for public safety and homelessness in the city. You know, the way Republicans treat the district is not only disrespectful, it's just plain rotten, and we'll be talking more about that later on. Some of the things in this bill are just so stupid and irresponsible. Giving Trump the tools to dismantle NOAA right before we head into another hurricane season. I mean, that's really smart. There are at least 22 instances where this bill sets program funding to zero. So please don't insult people's intelligence by calling this a clean CR. There's nothing clean about this. It's 99 pages, for God's sake. This is a sham, and it's the same sham Republicans have been pulling from day one, stealing from America to enrich themselves and their billionaire donors, looting from hardworking people to pad the pockets of ultra-rich 1% weirdos like Elon Musk. Again, this CR is not a clean CR. It is a hurtful bill that will impact everyday Americans. But that is the Republicans' choice to make. You run the House, you run the Senate, you run the executive. Republicans are in charge, and this is their CR. And if they shut down the government, it will be crystal clear for all to see who is to blame. No doubt in anyone's mind. If we shut down, it will be a Republican shutdown. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, former chairman of the Rules Committee and now chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Cole, and ranking member DeLauro from the Committee on Appropriations. Your full statement will be submitted for the record. We ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Cole, I welcome you on behalf of the whole committee to the Rules Committee again.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon Fox. It's great to be with you again, and Ranking Member McGovern, certainly great to be with you as well, and certainly with all of my colleagues. And as a former member of this committee, it's a great pleasure for me to get the opportunity to come back. I thank you for your warm welcome, and I thank you for the invitation to testify today. I appear before you today on the full-year Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act for 2025. Today's measure presents a stark choice for members of this body. Before us are two roads, one that leads to a government shutdown and another better road that keeps the government open and operating. As we move toward a vote on the House floor on this bill, members must ask themselves which road they wish to take. Do they want to vote to keep the government open and operating for their constituents, or do they want to affirmatively vote to shut the government down? This is the choice which faces us today. Over the past year, the Appropriations Committee has worked diligently to complete our work on fiscal year 2025. We initially had a late start due to prior constraints, but that didn't stop us from taking quick action. Our markup process successfully delivered all 12 regular appropriations bills out of committee in a timely fashion. And before the end of the summer, this chamber passed 5 bills across the floor representing nearly 71% of all overall discretionary spending. Since our last funding extension, we've worked diligently to reach a bipartisan and bicameral deal on full-year spending bills for FY25. Unfortunately, although we were close on the numbers, the minority has made additional demands on the legitimate exercise of executive authority in the appropriations process. These are demands that the minority would never accept for a Democratic president, nor are they provisions that President Trump would or should ever sign into law. This brings us to today. Despite our best efforts and despite the fact that Republicans never walked away from the negotiating table, we're now out of time. The House must move forward with a year-long continuing resolution. This outcome is not one that I wanted. However painful as it is, it's better than the alternative, which is a government shutdown. Congress has an obligation to our constituents and to the nation to keep the government open and operating. With today's measure, we achieve just that. Today's bill will fund the government through September 30th, the end of fiscal year 2025. It maintains the status quo, providing flat funding for the government and including only legitimate anomalies. We've accomplished these goals while also increasing money for the Department of Defense, fully funding the single largest pay raise for junior enlisted personnel in over 40 years. Importantly, today's bill also does not contain a single poison pill rider. It's a clean CR, fully funding our government. This includes our military and defense needs, support for our veterans, and critical services for our constituents like roads, parks, child care, water projects, infrastructure improvements, scientific research, job training, and countless others. Despite the fear-mongering, there are no changes to the important trifecta of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Quite the opposite. In fact, since this bill prevents a government shutdown, let me make that point more clear. There are no substantive changes in policy between this bill and the CR that we passed in December. Both are clean CRs that accomplish the overriding goal of keeping the government open, nothing more. For those who supported the December CR, you should have no concern with today's measure. Both December's bill and today's bill maintain the status quo, and both ensure that the government stays open. Voting for today's bill is no different than voting for the CR in December. I believe that those who voted for the CR in December and will now vote against today's bill are succumbing to the temptation of a political temper tantrum. The outcome of the FY 2025 appropriation process is not the one I wanted. But at the end of the day, today's bill achieves what's most important, keeping the government open and operating to the end of the fiscal year. I want to thank each of you for your time, and with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Or, excuse me, you made a change.
We switched chairs on you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now recognize Ranking Member of the Appropriations Committee, Representative DeLauro. You are now recognized for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I recognize Chairwoman Fox as well, and Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee. I'm opposed to this one-year continuing resolution. This is not a clean CR. This bill is a blank check. It's a blank check for Elon Musk and President Trump. And as the White House has said, it creates more flexibility for this administration to steal from the middle class, from seniors, veterans, working people, small businesses, and farmers to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. Since January 20th, this administration has been undermining Article 1 of our Constitution and countless spending laws by stealing promised investments from American families, from children and businesses, unlawfully dissolving and dismantling agencies, and arbitrarily firing civil servants and canceling union contracts. I know our colleagues across the aisle have gone home to their districts and witnessed the rage from their constituents at these actions. They've been advised by their political consultants not to do town halls, to stop listening to their constituents. It really, as President Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And they're getting out of the kitchen. And maybe it just should be getting out of being in charge. Now, what should we do? The answer should not be a full-year continuing resolution that cuts non-defense investments by $15 billion and defense by $3 billion compared to the Fiscal Responsibility Act agreement for 2025, which was reaffirmed by Leader Schumer and Speaker Johnson. A full-year CR transfers more power to the executive branch to shut off and repurpose funding as they see fit. The will of the Congress and people ignored. We are watching Elon Musk and President Trump meddle in Congress's jurisdiction already. With this full-year CR, the guardrails are off. It fails to lower costs for the American people, hurts the middle class. Elon Musk and President Trump would be able to fire thousands of employees at the Social Security Administration, resulting in office closures, longer wait times, unacceptable backlogs for Americans who are trying to access their earned benefits. Army Corps of Engineers construction projects would be cut by $1.4 billion, 44%, and President Trump, not Congress, would determine all project funding levels and who gets the funding. Instead of helping our communities address housing costs, the bill cuts rent subsidies by more than $700 million, leaving landlords to foot the bill or evict more than 32,000 households. High among the severe shortcomings of this bill are the broken promises to veterans. House Republicans wisely proposed $23 billion in advance funding for the Toxic Exposures Fund to care for veterans exposed to burn pits, Agent Orange, and other toxic substances in their own bill last summer. We do this with advance funding because we do not want to subject veterans' health care to shutdown threats or to political whims. That $23 billion in advance funding for toxic exposures has disappeared. This bill is also bad for our military. There is a reason the Department of Defense has never operated for an entire fiscal year under a CR. Trying that experiment now amidst the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the rising influence of China, would undermine the U.S.'s military effectiveness and readiness. The decisions about the investments we make cannot be entrusted in or controlled by one single office holder. Government spending decisions must be the result of broad compromise among the people's representatives. That has been the historical past of the Appropriations Committee and its work, and that's for good reason. Our positions in this body are temporary. We are but stewards of our system of government, and that stewardship requires preserving the separation of powers and co-equal branches of government as designed by the framers of the Constitution. Defined by the Supreme Court, where Antonin Scalia opined on this, the president does not have inherent authority over the amount of money that is appropriated by the Congress. All we need to do here is to follow the law and make sure that the executive is not tampering with the decisions made by the Congress. I work to uphold and defend our power of the purse, even when that meant going against a Democratic president. I implore my colleagues to join me. Stand up for our constituents against an unelected billionaire, Elon Musk, who was stealing taxpayers' dollars from American families, from our children, and from businesses. We cannot forfeit our authorities over government funding, as laid out in the Constitution, to an unelected, unchecked billionaire. The consequences felt by all our constituents are too severe. We cannot allow government of the people, by the people, for the people, to become the government of billionaires, by billionaires, and for billionaires. The first step in doing so is to oppose this bill so that we can pass a short-term bill to give Chairman Cole and I time to finish regular bills. We were very close and still are very close to getting this done where we would have year-long bills in the regular order. I think that we can all agree that that would be an improvement over a continuing resolution. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Ms. Fishbach for her time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I'd like to thank Mr. Cole and Ms. DeLauro for being here. And I appreciate you putting together, Mr. Cole, the continuing resolution, the bill that we have in front of us. And I just wanted to ask a couple of things, because I know there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of kind of accusations from the other sides of things that are going on in this bill that, you know, they talk about zeroing out the Toxic Exposure Fund. But my understanding, and you can true or false, on page 72, they're fully committed to supporting our veterans, and as a matter of fact, it includes a $6 billion increase in the Toxic Exposure Fund. Is that?
That's correct. You know, we will deal with the needs for 26 in the 26 bill. So all the needs currently are fully funded, and In fact, we used $6 billion from the Toxic Exposure Fund to do that. And again, we're committed to continue to meet those obligations. The appropriate place for that would be in a 26 bill for 26. So certainly nothing in this bill cuts anything that veterans are receiving today.
Perfect. And what about maybe some of the accusations that we're cutting police and the community-oriented policing, the COPS program is, it maintains its consistent level, is my understanding?
Correct. The only thing that really gets cut here are congressional projects, quite frankly. Those are eliminated. We don't normally do them in CRs. There's some confusion. Some people were wondering if we like zeroed out stuff from 24. We did not. We just, you know, if you put it in the 24 bill, in the 25 bill, if you don't take it out, you'd build like 2 bridges in the same places. That's it. And matter of fact, we took some of that money and used that for defense to pay for a pay raise. It's not, it's basically about the same amount of money, put a little bit extra money for housing to hopefully avoid anybody being, because we all know that's an inflationary bill. We put extra money on the border, where we've had, frankly, a lot of success in this administration. But overall, the bill spends about $7 billion less than the 24 bills. But again, those are all congressional projects. They're not substantive cuts in important programs.
Well, and I just wanted to counteract some of the rhetoric that comes from the other side, because they, you know, they're extreme talking about cutting police officers, you know, not taking care of veterans. And in reality, what you said about this bill is it's it helps rein in runaway inflation, but we are still investing in critical areas, and it helps us, it gives us the opportunity to work on those priorities with the administration and look at those critical areas, and gives us some opportunity to you know, really work in a meaningful way to get rid of the waste, the bloat, the fraud that's going on. And so I was just maybe with my final question, maybe you could talk about some of those priorities that were included in this bill.
Well, absolutely. And again, to be fair, the statement of the Democratic leadership against the bill was issued before the bill was actually available, unpublished. So I think the minds have been made up regardless of what's in the bill, and I think that's probably the reason for some of the overheated rhetoric that we saw out of Democratic leadership. The reality is here, again, we take care of business. These are, the anomalies we have, you know, very few people that I'm aware of are complaining about. You know, we promised in the last year's bill we'd give military people a pay raise. They're getting that pay raise. We know we've had great success on the border with the change in president. It takes a little bit more money to when you're finally removing people from the country that need to be removed. We put extra money in for WIC at the administration's request, about $500 million. That brings us up to about 7.6, if I remember correctly. So we certainly do some things that are good in this bill. Would we be better off with a negotiated bipartisan product? Sure, but we didn't get there, and that wasn't our fault. I don't blame my friends on the other side either. We were negotiating. My friend, the ranking member, was absolutely right about that. But you get to the point where if you don't get this done now, then we'll go through a shutdown. And frankly, if you try to do it in bits and pieces, you'll trigger a 1% across the board cut. It's better to build the safety net, if you will, all the way to the end of the fiscal year and get us out of this cycle of having to vote for CRs every 2 to 4 weeks. Congress does have other things to do. It's got a lot on its plate this year, obviously, with the reconciliation package. You know, you have other items that you're considering here that are pretty important, like being able to extend the time that we can prosecute people for fraud. None of those things happen if we don't get out of this sort of, you know, knee-jerk every few week consideration. So this one slightly lowers overall spending, takes care of everything, has reasonable anomalies in there. I mean, you know, for instance, last year's bill funded the inauguration. Well, why would we leave funding the inauguration in this year's bill? There's a lot of changes like that you just have to make, or you'd be literally flushing money down the toilet.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cole, and I appreciate, and I'm just going to say it again. We fund the toxic exposure for the veterans, women, infants, and children. That's additional money, and the COPS grants. And so those are the things. I appreciate that you put together a solid bill, and that we'll have the opportunity to work on the full budget as we go into it. Mr. Cole.
One point, just because, again, there's obvious confusion here. Look, if numbers come down because you take out congressional add-ons, that's not programmatic funding. That's not actually year-to-year funding. That's for a specific project, and we just don't normally do those in CRs. So that was the appropriate thing to do. So some things that look like they're cuts is just money being backed out for congressional projects that otherwise would have been there. That's it. It doesn't affect the baseline operation of the, of the particular agency in question.
And Mr. Cole, I appreciate that explanation because we know that you have put together a strong bill and that you know what you're doing. And so you aren't cutting things that shouldn't be cut. So thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern, for his time questioning. And note that the gentlelady used about 6 minutes and 45 seconds.
Do we have time limits now in this committee?
Well, what we're trying to do is the chairwoman has indicated that she's trying to get folks a lot closer to the 5 minutes.
Yeah, well,
Those are my
that
instructions.
goes against the longstanding tradition in
I
this
understand.
committee. And so and when I was, and I recall, and I'll save this when the gentlelady gets here, but when I remember presiding over a Rules Committee hearing where she went on for over an hour. And many members on the other side go on for quite some time. And I'd rather stick needles in my eyeballs than have to listen to them. But nonetheless, this is a place where debate is preserved, right? That's what makes this committee unique. And so I want to say right now that I object to any move to try to stifle debate in this committee.
Gentleman's objection is noted.
Okay, all right. And let me just say to the gentleman who just spoke, please forgive us if our constituents are a little weary of your assurances that veterans, for example, don't have to worry. I don't know if you're doing town halls in your district, but I will tell you that there are layoffs occurring in the VA as we speak, and veterans are quite concerned about that. Not to mention the number of public servants who don't work in the Veterans Administration, who are veterans, who are being laid off as we speak. It's a terrible, terrible thing to do to public servants. These people have families. Got to be some decency in the approach to how you reevaluate how you want to run these agencies. But there's no consideration given to them. Ranking Member DeLauro, aren't CRs typically worked out in a bipartisan way?
Really, that is what the most frustrating piece of this is all about. First of all, let me make one comment. 6,000 veterans have been fired. There is a memo that has emerged saying that another 80,000 were going to be fired. So veterans are wary. But one of the things that maybe some folks on this committee may not know about, people may not know about, is about advanced funding. And what we did with the veterans is to ensure that veterans' health care, because we all passed the PACT Act, bipartisan, all veterans exposed to toxic chemicals, burns, et cetera, you're going to get treated for that. And specifically in the bill, we said that the money would come out of mandatory funding. And I won't go into the deliberations, but we had a struggle to get the $6 billion in mandatory funding. And so we do advance funding so that the veterans are not at the whim of either side of the aisle here. We do the similar advance funding for Indian Health Services. We do that. And so why in the bill that the House Republicans put together at the outset had the $23 billion for veterans to guarantee it, and now it doesn't have it. So I really need to make that clear. Bipartisanship has been the hallmark. And I just say that to my friend from Oklahoma. For years, we could not get a labor HHS bill passed. We worked together, and we got it done. We got it done. For the first time in several years, we know how to hammer out the differences. And that is historic. It's not just about Chairman Cole and Ranking Member DeLauro, but in times past, we have seen People work through the process, that you come up with the top line. And we were that close to the top line. And so that the money can be allocated to the subcommittees, where then we hammer out. And you give some, you lose some. That is the name of the compromise of the bill and how it works. And it has worked. We were that close. And I will just say this, if the rug had not been pulled out from under because Elon Musk, the president, and Russ Vought, head of OMB, want a one-year continuing resolution. Why? Because it transfers the power of the spending, where it's directed, how it is directed, what the benefits are, what are the consequences if it doesn't go to the people that we represent. They want to control that process. And for one, as an appropriator, I don't want to see us. I want to see us determined, members, both sides, Democrats, Republicans, because the appropriations bill cannot pass without House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans saying yes. We make that determination. The president signs it, and it becomes the law of the land. That is appropriations. Let us not eviscerate the appropriations process in this building, because the human consequences to our constituents will suffer.
So I take that to mean that you were not part of drafting this?
No.
Right, okay. Chairman Cole, can you explain what your bill does with respect to the District of Columbia's local funds?
Yeah, mostly it's flat funding. The lower is mostly things like the inauguration, which obviously we wouldn't normally fund the next year. So there's not substantive changes at all in terms of what DC gets.
But your own CR told DC that it was okay to spend at the levels proposed in their FY 2025 budget when you introduced it in September. And I understand from Ranking Member DeLauro that including the anomaly was non-controversial in the fall. You continued this authority in your second CR in December until March 14th. So why are we turning around today and revoking this authority when we're halfway through the year?
Well, you know, it's time to move on. And again, we've not taken anything out of there that substantively that affects the day-to-day operation of municipal services here. Again, this is mostly things like we don't have an inauguration again.
Well, I think it's about more than the inauguration. And, I mean, there are plenty of other anomalies in the short-term CR here, more than 50 of them. And it looks like somebody made sure to include full-year provisions to include those partial year decisions. I see full-year provisions that extend shipbuilding authorities that you started in CR1, provisions that include road building authorities in Arlington that you started in CR1, and even an anomaly to take care of a study at the Department of Labor that you started in September. Yet when it comes to DC, this bill kind of pulls the rug from under them after they did exactly what the first two CRs allowed them to do. And so I guess the question is, like, why?
Again, as I just answered, we took things out that we thought we were done with. Again, when you write those earlier CRs, you thought we would have a deal by then. We didn't. And now we're trying just to make sure the government is more or less flat funded, minor reductions, redistribution of some of the existing money to cover previous obligations. But we just don't see it the way you do, that this is somehow some big hit. We just don't think it is.
Ranking Member DeLauro, do you agree that this is just basically making an adjustment to deal with inauguration funds?
No, it is not, because the result of what I believe is the $1.1 billion cut. This is really for the district. I think it is the numbers I have. DC police will be cut by $67 million. Police officers will be fired. DC's human services will be cut by $28 million. That hinders the district from dealing with the homelessness issues. Firefighters, EMS, teachers, and other district employees will have to go. They will be fired.
Right.
That means that the services that a government entity is providing us no longer has the resources to be able to do that. And as you pointed out, this didn't happen with other with
Right, no,
other.
and again, it's an awful lot of money. And this is where we get into the issue of what will be sacrificed. And that's where we talk about police officers and firefighters and other essential services to DC. I just want to say one thing, because I think it's worth saying, and then I'll close. Look, at DC residents pay an awful lot of taxes. In fact, more per capita than any other state. Many serve in the military. They are American citizens, and they don't even have voting representation in Congress. It is rotten how they are treated, and this bill I see as something that just kind of piles on. DC passed a budget for this fiscal year, a balanced budget, I might add, but now Republicans are blowing up their budget with no warning, and I think it will impact safety, cops, firefighters, teachers, and I think it's shameful and regrettable. And I think if we had a truly bipartisan collaboration on this CR, I mean, I really, and I don't believe, Mr. Cole, because I know you very well, that you would have done this on your own.
Actually, if I may,
Yeah.
we invited Democrats to participate in the anomalies process, and they chose not to do that. I mean, I said look, publicly and privately, and we were told, look, we've been told not to participate.
Yeah.
So I can't control it if somebody won't show up.
No one told us not to participate. That is inaccurate.
That's what
Well, I don't
I
know
said
who
that's
you
what
heard
I
that
was
from.
told.
You didn't hear, okay, but
But
certainly not
we
from me.
did offer to, you
Well-
know, and the decision was made not to do that. So it's hard to be accused of not taking into
well, I guess my
consideration.
point is
advice.
that
Well,
If-
when you're looking at a one-year continuing resolution, what result is to provide a blank check to the Elon Musk and to President Trump and to remove and eviscerate the authority of the Appropriations Committee. And I don't, again, look, that's in-house. And why any appropriator would want to turn over that responsibility to the executive, certainly I don't and will not. So why would I be complicit in an effort that would do just that?
No, and I hear you. I just, again, say that I think if we had a bipartisan process here, a lot of the
With a
stuff we're
regular
talking about,
order,
a
we
regular
would
order, a lot of this stuff with regard to DC and some of the other issues that I mentioned in my opening statement, I think would have been resolved, because I believe we could have resolved them, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back and now recognize Mr. Roy for his time for questions.
Thank the chairman, thank the witnesses for appearing. Just to clarify here, so the American people kind of know what we're dealing with, my colleagues as well, as we head into this and establish the rule for the debate tomorrow. Overall spending is basically frozen. Is that right? It's
Yeah,
basically
down
flat to
$7 billion,
2024.
but that's out of $1.665 trillion, kind of total. So yeah, it's down a little bit, but not a lot.
Effectively, statistically speaking, it's flat or frozen. It's down $7 billion.
Correct.
Is that a fair
That's a
characterization?
fair characterization.
Number two, defense spending is up slightly, like $6 billion.
$2.5 billion.
Or $2.5 billion.
About 1.7 of that is pay raises that had already been committed to.
Okay. And then the NDD portion is down, but that is reflective
The
mostly.
which portion, I'm sorry?
Non-defense discretionary is down, but that is reflective mostly of what I would call
Congressional
earmarks.
project. Yeah, what you
and
would call earmarks.
The
what
politically correct
My friend and
term is-
I would call community projects.
Right. Then those, congressionally directed spending or whatever the politically correct term is for earmarks, those are not a part of this, so that number is down. This is not a multi-page omnibus bill at the last minute. This is a 99-page continuation
No,
of current funding.
we had, I want to be careful here. I don't want to step on any of our authorizers' toes, but we certainly had lots of requests to put stuff on, and as I told my friends, don't you remember December? There was only 130 pages in that CR and that disaster relief bill. They put a lot of other stuff on. We didn't allow that to happen.
So it is fewer than 100 pages, about
Correct.
99 pages.
I think it's 99.
And it is a full year, if you will, a
Full fiscal
continuing
year.
resolution,
Yeah.
full fiscal year,
Through
to take us through September 30th, which at
Correct.
this point is basically a 6-month and change extension.
Correct.
It is a it is also true, right, that we had the full 72 hours to review this text. It was
Correct.
released Saturday before we vote. It is also true that the veteran spending goes up, correct?
Correct,
There's additional funding for veterans.
correct.
It is also true that there's about $500 million, a little less than, in additional support for ICE. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that is critically important at this moment while the president is trying to clean up what was a disastrous open border situation. It is also correct that air traffic control funding is up. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It is also true that crop insurance is extended. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
In most categories.
Yes.
It is also true that as DOGE through Elon and those working with Elon, that they are identifying waste, fraud, and abuse and concerns in the spending process, whether it's duplicate Social Security numbers, whether it's extraordinary expenditures under USAID, such as a $32,000 transgender comic book in Peru, or a play in, I think, Ireland, or whatever. Go down the list of all these expenditures, that they're identifying these things, and then to the extent they have power through the executive branch, limiting those expenditures, or if you're, for example, the Secretary of State, ending certain contracts under USAID while they review that spending. And to the point of the ranking member, that all of this input that we're getting from that review, through the algorithms looking at the expenditures through Treasury, we'll be able to report it back to Congress. We'll be able to take that into account in the appropriations process for FY26, which we have now 6 months to complete.
That's correct. You know, we thought it would be too soon to do anything like that. You haven't had a chance to verify or hear. And so the appropriate place would be the FY26 bills and/or a rescission package if that was the approach that the administration and Congress chose to, you know, use.
And is it not true that we are well into that window in which we need to be moving quickly to achieve appropriations for FY26? Would the chairman of the Appropriations Committee agree that we're at that point where we need to be getting the budget from the administration, operating under our budget, and executing with the levels that you need to have in place for the appropriations process so that we can move to get, to the best of our ability, the 12 bills passed? Do you agree we should be moving on that with dispatch?
I absolutely do. I would add, and I'd say this, and I said this when President Biden, any new administration has a hard time meeting the deadline to submit a budget, which is actually middle of February. So we're still waiting, and we have to have that. But we're waiting, we wait on every administration. They don't have an OMB director at that point. They don't have a Secretary of the Treasury. The president should have been able to count on full funding through September 30th of this year and not worry about that. But, you know, he didn't get that. He didn't get it in 2017 either. And I'm not casting stone, but that's a congressional bipartisan failure, in my view. If we'd had gotten our work done last year when we should have, we wouldn't be having this meeting here today. We'd had a budget that was already running through. So, and I can heap lots of blame. I will tell you, our committee did its work. It got all of its bills out in a timely fashion. We could have voted on all 12. We voted on, I think, 7. 5 of them passed. Most of the money got through. But Congress needs to get its act together. And again, I'm very critical of Congress on that, on both sides. The committee didn't fail. The product was ready to go to the floor. We just couldn't get them all to the floor and couldn't get them across the floor, quite frankly. And, you know, as disappointed as I am there, I will point out on the other side, we don't get to do things by ourselves in the House. There is a United States Senate. They didn't pass one appropriations bill last year. And as a matter of fact, if they'd passed one, we actually could have had a conference and could have opened up and dealt with all of them on that basis. But the
Chairman
Senate
Cole,
didn't kick out a single appropriations bill.
and just to underscore that, this is really important. The House passed 5 appropriations bills in this cycle, FY25, last year, correct?
Correct.
The previous year, we passed 7, is that correct? And the Senate, under Democrat leadership, under each of those times, now obviously this fiscal year is now transitioned to Republican leadership, but we're only a mere, 6 weeks, 8, 8 weeks into that. So to be clear for the American people, we passed 5 bills and and do we have all 12 out of committee?
Yes.
We had all 12 out of committee, 5 off the floor. We had all 12 out of committee the previous year.
All 12 before the August break, too.
Right. And we had all 12 the previous year, including 7 off the floor, correct?
Correct.
And did the Democrat-controlled Senate pass one single appropriations bill either time?
You know, I can't remember the first if they passed one or not. I know they didn't last year.
Okay.
But I don't think they did, but I can't remember.
Well, I think that's right, and I know I'm pushing up on time. I appreciate it. I think this is a responsible step forward, and I know, look, I've got some on my kind of more moderate flank and my conservative flank that have concerns, and a lot of people have said, well, you know, we're moving a full year funding a continuing resolution. That's not how we should do business. Well, I think that the chairman of appropriations would agree.
Absolutely.
I would agree. Right, that's not. We would like to have 12 appropriations bills, but we didn't get it done. And we didn't get it done in significant part because the Senate refused to pass a single appropriations bill. So here we are, and we're trying to clean up that mess. And now we can move forward with this bill, hold spending roughly flat, be able to advance the cause for our defense, be able to advance the cause to be able to move the appropriations bills for this year. Funding's up for veterans. We've got the extension in for crop insurance. We don't have any earmarks in there for better or worse. Some of us think that's a good thing, some less so. And we've got a reduction, to the best of my understanding, in some of the IRS expansion, a lot of things that are priorities. I think this is a big step forward, and we should now focus on FY26 and get the appropriations bill, and I appreciate the testimony of the gentleman.
I would add, if I may.
Yep.
We don't do this, it shuts down. You tell me how that's better. Yeah, whatever your individual concerns are here or there in the bill, fair enough. But you tell me how a government shutdown, for no purpose at all, to achieve no objective that I can see, is better for the American people. I just think it's not.
And to that end, I would like unanimous consent to insert into the record article in the Hill, Democrats step up talk about using shutdown as leverage against Trump with respect to Elon and Doge. Another article quoting one of our colleagues, Democrat from New York, quoted, the Senate Democrats don't have the gumption to do what is necessary at this moment. I believe the House Democrats will, in the same context of the same article. Another article talking about the importance of using shutdown to try to force change among Elon.
Without objection,
I yield back.
documents are admitted. The gentleman yields back and now recognize Ms. Scanlon for her time to question.
Thank you, and I'll yield some time to Mr. McGovern.
I think maybe you guys need to take a refresher course in arithmetic. Last time I checked, you have the majority in the House and in the Senate, and you control the White House. The idea that somehow Democrats have the responsibility to pass a CR or any bill, quite frankly, where we don't have any input on, I think is ridiculous. I mean, you run around bragging about this big mandate. Well, put on your mandate pants and pass whatever you want to do. And I think you probably will have the votes, because even the so-called principled conservatives who don't like CRs, I think they're suffering from a case of Victoria Sparks syndrome, where on Monday they're a hard no, and then on Tuesday they're a hard yes. They'll cave. So, but the idea that somehow being in charge means that you don't have to take the responsibility of running this place is absurd. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Thank you. Look, for the past year and a half, House Republicans have struggled to pass any appropriations bills, rather than negotiating with Democrats and independents and reaching an agreement in the middle where most Americans are. House Republicans have repeatedly chosen to negotiate only with their most radical colleagues, those who are intent upon imposing their own extremist views on the American public. And as a result, most of this year's appropriations bills failed to pass the House, and none passed the Senate. So here we are, almost halfway through fiscal year 2025, and Republicans have now given up on trying to pass the 2025 appropriation bills at all. And instead, they're trying to kick the can down the road yet again. But once again, they failed to do the difficult bipartisan work necessary to produce a budget that works for all of the American people. They've refused to negotiate with Democrats to craft bills that can gain votes from across the political spectrum and serve the American people as a whole. Instead, they are seeking to avert a funding crisis of their own making with a bill which they are deceptively calling a continuing resolution. A true, clean continuing resolution would continue spending at current levels, not reduce non-defense spending by $13 billion. A truly clean CR could pass today, probably with 350 members voting yes. But the bill before us is not a clean continuing resolution. This is a partisan, Republican spending bill drafted behind closed doors by Republicans and only made public on Saturday, just days before the government runs out of money. This partisan Republican bill makes drastic cuts and reallocations to important federal programs, including health care benefits for veterans who've been exposed to burn pits or Agent Orange, low-income housing, food and agricultural inspections, funding for election security, and critical government services in our nation's capital. And it gives President Trump and his unelected billionaire buddies free rein to gut or privatize or siphon money from important government services that Americans rely upon, like Social Security or the FAA, with no oversight or input from Congress. That's our Article 1 duty. So no, this is far from a clean continuing resolution. Republicans are trying to force through what is essentially a Republican FY 2025 appropriations bill filled with cuts and policy changes while abandoning Congress's responsibility to decide how and why to spend taxpayer dollars. Republicans made no attempt to discuss this bill with Democrats, and they refused to negotiate its contents. If Republicans want our votes, they have to negotiate to address our priorities, not just their donors' wish lists. This bill is filled with policies that would harm our constituents, and if Republicans aren't going to negotiate with us, if they're going to jam through this destructive partisan bill at the 11th hour, then they'd better be prepared to own it and pass it with their own votes. So, Ranking Member DeLauro, can you walk us through some of the cuts in this bill that we've heard about already? I think there's been some mischaracterization about the funding for the Toxic Exposure Fund, which provides additional care to veterans who suffer from service-related conditions. What do these cuts mean for veterans who are supposed to receive benefits under the PACT Act?
I'm happy to do that. Let me make one comment. You said something in your remarks, a funding crisis of their own making. And in defense of the appropriations process, Democrats and Republicans, my colleague from Oklahoma, my colleagues in the Senate from Washington State and from Maine, we were prepared to deal with all of this in December. In December, where we could have come to a conclusion.
And I don't want to cast aspersions on the appropriators because I know they've consistently been able to come up with a deal. It's after those bills have left appropriations that they have become
that
partisan.
time, it was the Republican Speaker of the House who would not let us go forward and get it done in December and pushed it to March 14th. And quite frankly, maybe some understood there's a wonderful Yiddish word that is mishigas that we are really engaged in at the moment here, where we are watching. And by the way, in December, if you will recall, House, Senate, Democrats, Republicans, Speaker, White House came up with a bill. It was in the last hours that the unchecked billionaire, the 800-pound gorilla here, parachuted in and said to our Republican colleagues, do not vote for this bill. And we had done all the appropriations work there and just disrupted that process. We got through that. We moved to this March 14th date. And here we are, very close to having someplace. And then again, because people view this one-year CR as license. And to my colleague, Mr. Roy, I believe said at some point today that this CR would encourage this administration to keep impounding. And you know what impounding is? It is stealing the money, taxpayers' dollars, from our constituents. Taxpayers' dollars that have already been appropriated and signed into law by the President of the United States. There may be some people who need to get that little booklet that we give our kids that says how a bill becomes law. It's not just a suggestion, it is a law, and we're flying in the face of that effort. Some of the things that really, that I've talked about, let me just talk about look, fails to lower the cost of housing. We've talked about Social Security, and we're also we're talking about 7,000 people being let go from Social Security. The Army Corps of Engineers, again, construction projects would be cut by $1.4 billion, 44%. And again, the president, not the Congress, would determine all the project funding levels and who gets the funding. Housing, as I mentioned, cuts rent subsidies by more than $700 million, leaving landlords to foot the bill, evict more than 32,000 households. We've talked all about veterans, and you know, the defense, if you talk to the defense community, they have their hair on fire as a result of looking at a one-year-long continuing resolution. And let me mention defense for a moment. You know, the facts are that we went into negotiations in looking at defense and non-defense and saying the top line had to really measure what the agreement was in the Fiscal Responsibility Act as reaffirmed and voted on by the Speaker of the House and the leader in the Senate. If you look at that 1%, in terms of the 2025 negotiations, it winds up being a $15 billion cut to non-defense and a $3 billion cut to defense. It's because you have to look at it in juxtaposition against the negotiations that we went into on this effort. 1%. That's what the Fiscal Responsibility Act told us to do. This body and the leadership of this body reaffirmed that, and that has been pulled back. So, in fact, there is a cut to non-defense, and in fact, there is a cut to defense as well. And there are many others. I've got a 5-page document that goes through chapter and verse of every area that has been cut short, including the NIH, including food programs, including disaster relief. I got disaster relief. We were supposed to give them $10 billion in December, which we didn't do. And now we've already started having floods and hurricanes, and the money isn't going to be there for people who lost their homes or lost their businesses. I won't go through the entire list. I don't have time to do that, nor will I be given the time to do it.
Thank you, Ranking Member. You addressed many of the cuts that my constituents have expressed concern about, including cutting $700 million in housing assistance, the failure to fund the Toxic Exposure Fund, the cuts to employees at the VA, and the cuts of $1.4 billion from the Army Corps of Engineers. And you did mention that impounding money violates the terms of how bills are passed. It also violates the Constitution. I mean, that is, we have the power of the purse, we pass the laws, we determine how the taxpayer funding is to be spent, and it may be easier to let Musk and the president decide unilaterally to cut that, but that's not their job, and it is unconstitutional.
You know, there's a $4 billion, really, for the FAA, provides a blank check to the Federal Aviation Administration, the amount of $4 billion, which would enable Elon Musk to direct contracts to Starlink and SpaceX. These are companies that he owns. And when the programs are unvetted, unchecked, SpaceX employees have borrowed, there's no transparency, there's no competition, or congressional approval. Conflict of interest after conflict of interest.
Well, so, of course, it's a concern when you have the person who's directing all of this activity with direct conflicts of interest and expressing interest in diverting more federal funding to his own pocket. So, again, that's why the concerns about transparency and lack of congressional oversight and participation are so serious at this point. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Langworthy, you're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, Chairman Cole. Welcome back to the Rules Committee. I want to also thank the Ranking Rizzler for joining us here. I want to salute you for your work on this. I know you wanted the appropriations process to work the way it was intended, but the CR, I think, is a very sound one. It's not where I think we all wanted to get to, but it will keep the government open and functional. But I wanted to just get your insight here. The CR, among keeping almost all funding level, also includes important increases in funding for critical areas such as VA, healthcare, defense, and other core assistance programs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That is correct. There's a lot of misinformation about VA funding. Could you jump into a little more detail on how we have topped up VA funding?
Yeah, we've given everything that was asked for. Obviously, the toxic exposure fund, $6 billion there. And what we said is we'll deal with 26 in the 26 bill. So that seems to be a matter of some contention here, but that's what we'll do. I don't think anybody could be very critical of Republicans or Democrats, quite frankly, on funding VA. I think we've been pretty robust in that over the last several years. Genuinely bipartisan. This bill doesn't stray from that. Just says let's deal with the 26 problems in the 26 bill.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Chairman Cole. I really appreciate the work of the Appropriations Committee and appreciate your time here today, and I will yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Cole, this is the fiscal 2025 budget, which starts in calendar 24, October the 1st of 2024. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Who was the president then?
President Biden.
Who was in control of the Senate?
Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer as the majority leader.
So, and that's, I mean, when we started this meeting, the first words out of the Democrats' mouths were, this is your fault because you're in control of everything. But just factually speaking, the Democrats had the White House and the Senate when this budget should have been done, correct?
That's correct. And the only body that moved anything across the floor was this body.
That's right.
Which moved over 70% of all spending across the floor.
That's right.
And, at some point, and I make this, if one house is not functional, it affects the other house and
Sure.
what it can do. And I promise you, the inability of Democrats to pass a single appropriations bill last year impacts what we do. At some point, your own members begin saying, well, why are we doing all this work? Why are we voting on all these bills? They're not moving anything over there. You're not going to have a normal conference. We're going to get down to one big, omnibus spending bill again. Both chambers, and I say this as an institutionalist, not as a Republican or Democrat, both of them have to do their work. And we didn't get all our work done, but we came a lot closer than anybody else involved in the process. And the president's not an insignificant player in this. I mean, nothing's going to become law unless he's overridden on a veto.
And I think what's happened over the course of time is the Democrats have learned that all they have to do is nothing, and then there is a government shutdown, and then Republicans historically get the blame for the shutdown, whether it's our fault or not. And so when we send this bill across the floor tomorrow, it will be Schumer shutdown 2.0 if he decides for it to be, because it will be him that has decided to shut the government down, just as he did in the last Trump administration. So just one final thing I want to make, and D.C. has a balanced budget. The state of Georgia has a balanced budget. Every state in the country has a balanced budget. Is that correct, Mr. Cole?
I think all but one is required to, yeah.
By Constitution.
By Constitution.
And that is why many of us believe that block grants are a better solution, because the states, Democrats and Republicans, have to work together to balance the budget. And those decisions are made closer to the people that they affect. And so I think the fact that balanced budget amendment is there is all the more reason in the world that we should continue to pursue block grants instead of federal agencies micromanaging the programs that the states can better manage and deliver the services at a lower cost to the people. And with that, Mr. Cole, I'll yield the remainder of my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
Well, it appears that we have completed the, oh, I'm sorry, Ralph, I apologize. Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Cole, glad to have you back in your old stomping grounds. Mr. DeLauro, while I don't agree with you, I admire your passion for what you do. And you did a good job explaining it Saturday, too, in a concise way. You know, when I keep hearing bipartisanship, why that's not happening, and it's not going to happen with some of the outlandish things that y'all are wanting, like to take Elon Musk off the job. You keep saying, I think, Mr. DeLauro, that he's stealing. I don't think he needs to steal. I think he's okay financially. He's the richest, and I think he made it at the he made a product. He wasn't on the government dole. I think the fact that you want to, one of the things that you wanted him to be limited in what he discovers, you make this argument to the American people. You make the argument that 20 million that he found in USAID, 20 million went to Sesame Street show in Iraq. You make the argument 1.2 million for sex change and LGBT activism in Guatemala. You defend that. 2.5 million to promote inclusion in Vietnam. 16.8 million for a separate inclusion group in Vietnam. 20 million for a group related to a key player in the Russian impeachment hoax. 1.1 million to an American LGBT group. 500,000 to Politico. You make that argument. The American people are going to be the final judge of what he's finding. And thank God we've got somebody that's willing to do that. Now, Mr. McGovern mentioned there was a mandate. There was a mandate. 77 million people voted to end the 4-year misery that your party had. 77 million people voted with their went to the polls. You kept saying, you know, you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts.
No, I got facts.
The military is being funded, an additional $6 billion, I think, in it. Chairman
That's for
Cole.
veterans, that's the shortfall.
$2.5 billion. So if that's the case, if the veterans are so upset, why is the enrollment up astronomically from what Joe Biden did to this country? With veterans, they were demoralized. Why? You talking about bipartisan? Was it bipartisan when he opened the gates to let everybody from every country in? And I'll say this, it was despicable what happened on the House floor in the State of the Union. For y'all not to stand for a cancer patient of a child, for you not to stand for a mother whose child was raped and killed, that defies logic. And the American people got a front and center stage view of what the Democrat Party has become. And it's really sad, to be honest with you.
Mr. Norman, may I just very quickly
Don't
respond?
filibuster. Just
No
answer.
filibuster, no. I would just say to you that I believe that, I think you'd have to agree that Elon Musk has, and I just know one, $7 billion tied up in China for Tesla. He's got millions of contracts with China and in other places.
Okay.
And listen, but it is
Okay,
the
go
Fox.
over these.
It
It's
is-
just one.
I'm just saying, look, you can differ. We can differ on that. Why would any of us want a unelected individual with serious conflicts of interest with the federal government writ large, Starlink?
I'm reclaiming my time.
Well,
'cause
okay.
we've got-
Well, you don't want to
you
listen
made-
to the facts.
You made your
Made the
point.
fa- the
But
facts.
he's not taking a salary. He's not stealing because he doesn't need to steal.
But no,
And
he's
the
stealing
fact that-
taxpayers'
I'm
money.
reclaiming my time, Mr.
Taxpayers'
Lario.
money are
I
being-
let you talk. I let you
Well,
talk.
I've let, you know,
But I'm not going to let
respond.
you, I get your,
Thank you.
Norman said he was reclaiming his time.
and no one hears when we're talking over each other. I gave you time, but I'm not letting you filibuster. But all I'm saying is, Americans have had a front row seat to the damage you did for this country, and they made their case known, and they went to the polls.
They went on cost of living, cost of
I'm reclaiming
living.
my time, Mr. DeLauro. You can't just interrupt. Chairman Cole, does this in any way cut Medicaid?
No,
Mr. DeLauro mentioned Social Security. Does it cut Social Security?
no.
So
We
it's
don't
just
deal with
wrong.
those things in appropriations other than their
I didn't say that.
administrative units.
It's just wrong. They say we're going, well, maybe it was Ms. Scanlon. I don't know who said it, but the IRS agents that the Biden presidency was going to hire 87,000, he cut it by $20 million that went there, $20 billion that went to, I guess, take away the IRS agents that
Correct.
were. So, you know, it's sad we can't have bipartisanship, but until it changes with what's happened, is there any way this, and I don't like CRs, but this is a conservative CR at the right time, at the right place, and with what DOES is identifying and letting, you know who's going to be the judge? The American people. To stop the momentum now, I don't think is the right thing to do. This will pass with only Republican votes, I think. And I just want to commend you for your work done on it, and look forward to debating this on the floor and bringing it up for a vote. I yield back.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. And I noted that our a good colleague was reciting much of what we heard at the State of Union. I need to remember that the president started the joint address with a statement that he was the most successful president ever, with George Washington coming in second. So when a president starts a statement with that, then you can sort of guess as to how accurate the rest of the speech will be. And I thought that that was very interesting. I mean, he even complained about the transgenic mice as a problem. And we need to remember the transgenic mice is how we investigate cancers and other kind of research. So the failure to understand the science between some of the long lists that was also repeated here, I think is interesting to know. But we are on this budget, and I'm going to give you some time, Representative DeLauro, to respond to what you were not able to speak to with regards to some of this budget, and then I'll have a few questions for you.
Thank you. I would just repeat that we have, we're all elected here. Our constituents make a determination of whether or not they think we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. They just say, okay, we're going to elect you or we're going to find someone else. And they give you their trust to work on their behalf. That's, now, Elon Musk has not been elected. He has no authority. This DOGE is no department. It's a construct that people have come up with to give him full reign to trample the federal government. Mention Social Security. No, we don't deal with Social Security. We do deal with the administration of Social Security. 7,000 people are going to be let go from the Social Security Administration. I hope, Congressman Norman, that they do not close a Social Security office in your district, or that there are no wait lines in your district or in anybody's district. That, no, I've got this, no, you would not let me, please. I would love to, you have been responding. That is, and offices and Social Security offices are going to be closed all across this country. And I happen to know that individual members are writing to the administration saying, ooh, don't close my Social Security office. I don't want any wait times. I don't want any backlogs. Make sure that it doesn't happen in my backyard. That's happening all over this government. And a lot of Republicans are doing that because they're fearful. And I would just say, this election, you know what? I support election results. I am not an election denier, as so many people on the other side of the aisle have been election deniers. But this election was fought over the cost of living, people's ability to be able to pay their mortgages, put food on the table, and do all and take care of their kids, make sure that they could pay their health care bills.
Right.
There hasn't been one policy that has been put forward by this current administration that deals with the cost of living for the American public. I apologize to my colleague in taking her
Thank you,
time.
Ranking Member. And I think it really is important to focus on the fact that Musk and Trump and this dodgy committee have been trampling on Congress's power as well. You know, the firing of the federal workers, the, firing of the Social Security officers who have to process the checks. It takes people to do this work. The firing of the firefighters, the closing of the Head Start. Across our districts, people are mad. In fact, they're so mad in Republican districts.
6,000 veterans fired.
The firing of the veterans. They're so mad that Republicans have been told don't hold town halls because your voters are too mad. And the courts are agreeing that it is Congress's power, not Musk, who's never been approved by the Senate, we have never had in our history, Congress seeming to roll over and give to an unelected billionaire this kind of power. We've never had it. No senatorial approval. He's not even been submitted. And what's scary is we have these 40 decisions so far, courts all over the country, Republican-nominated judges say no. Musk can't do this, Trump can't do that. It's Congress's role to decide the power of the purse. And it's right here, Chair Cole, I know you know this really well because you believe in the process of appropriations. You and I have had these conversations. It's right here. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. And it includes in here further on, that is the Congress who shall decide the funding, the levying of taxes, the revenue, how do we fund the general welfare? But what we've had is that Musk and Trump are doing it. And what a CR does, as I understand it, and this is what you've been trying to explain to everybody, is it gives up Congress's control. Because when you say 99 pages is great, what it means is it's only 99 pages, and you're not containing the instructions that Congress always does. A long bill is not bad because it explains what Congress wants. And we're not doing that now. You're giving away Congress's power for a whole year. And on the veterans, I think it is a problem when we don't advance fund the PACT Act. Because we did this with IHS because VA advanced funds. Because it's not right to have a veteran show up on November 1st and say, oh, well, wait a minute, Congress couldn't get its act together, they didn't fund us. You have that doctor's appointment, you deserve to be advance funded. And that's what's not included. And you know why I'm so concerned about not including that $22.6 billion for the veterans? It's because the Trump administration keeps insulting our veterans. How dare his administration say that our veterans are not fit to serve, which is what they've said, right? And so they don't give us any kind of confidence that they will do it. Ranking Member DeLauro, do you agree that failing to do the advance funding is indeed a cut from the bipartisan tradition of funding the VA in advance?
I would put it this way. It reneges on the promise to our veterans because we specifically, and again, voted in a bipartisan way on that PACT Act, and we specifically said that it was going to be mandatory funding. And we dealt with advanced funding because for whatever the political reason, as you pointed out, that veteran may not be able to be helped because we can't agree with it. And let me just say this to you, and I think the chair would agree. We came to a conclusion because we understood it was the right thing to do. We had difficulty in the negotiation because the $6 billion, they wanted to have to take it out of non-defense. And it was rather than mandatory. And we finally got there because reasonable people can come to a conclusion. But the $23 billion is not there. But what is important is that it was in the Republican bill, the House Republican bill. That $23 billion was there, and now it was taken out here. And if you think it was tough getting $6 billion to deal with funds for veterans, try getting $23 billion come the next year, unless we have agreed to do that now to protect our veterans.
And they took-
6,000 have been fired already. Let's not lose track of that.
Yeah, and I want to go to the issue of, Chairman Cole, I know that we've talked about many things, and I know you love your beautiful Oklahoma, those big plains, and you know that you love that land. And I think you'd agree that the federal government was essential to recover following the Dust Bowl, correct?
Correct.
Right. And so we have been funding the Soil Conservation Service, which is now the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And so I'm concerned because, you know, I spend time in my rural areas, and my farmers can understand why they're freezing equip funds, why NRCS is attacked. And we are $30 million from the Natural Resources Conservation Service has been rescinded, and we're not restoring that.
No, those are programs that were congressional mandated. Those were
Congressionally mandated.
community. No, excuse me, community projects. Those were the monies that were rescinded, not the base budget of the agency.
Well, I have here section 784 of the unobligated balances from
You,
prior year
you will
appropriations.
find
So I
project
still
money
think,
after project money taken out, because otherwise you're paying for the same thing again.
yeah.
Those are congressional projects that aren't there now.
So I think that there's two different ways in which the NRCS has been, the funds have been gone, as I understand it. There's the NRCS, the failure of rescissions in the community projects. But what they are is by not doing those community projects, by not investing in the projects that the Congress people, we are the closest to the people. And when we don't do those programs, we are failing in our obligation to our voters
I would
to
have much
direct funding.
preferred a negotiated deal, but we're 4 days away from a shutdown. That's going to be a lot worse than any particular item you might disagree with in this. If you want to vote to shut down the government, feel free. You're going to have that opportunity come tomorrow. I'm going to vote to keep the government open. That's really the binary choice in front of us right now. So again, we can, and my friend is right, we leave us to negotiate, we generally can get there. But this has gone on a long time, and my friends brought up a lot of things that would restrict presidential power that we were not going to accept. We told you we were not going to accept it. We said that repeatedly, and we didn't. So, but at some point, you have to act. This is the time to act. You want to shut down the government, you have the opportunity to do it. I just don't think that's a smart thing to do.
I think that the Republicans are in charge of the House, Senate, and the White House, so this is
Well,
their job to keep the government open. But I'm going to turn it over to a
Don't
ranking
disagree with
member.
that, but we'll wait and see what the Senate does, because there has to be Democratic participation there. Saying we control the Senate as long as there's a filibuster, saying either side has complete control in the way that you do in the House, just not the case. So let's wait and see what happens. But again, a vote against this bill is a vote to shut down in 4 days, so.
So I'll let ranking member DeLauro
I would
respond.
just say is that's a political statement. But the fact of the matter is, right now, when there was the opportunity to get to that conclusion, and we know that we were almost there, and in fact that then the decision made by the Speaker, by Musk, and by Trump was, whoa, and Russ Vought, who is, a chief impounder of them all here, has said, oh, no, we do better. We do better with being able to direct and redirect money if we do a one-year-long CR. We could get there. We could do, if left us in a very short order, get that top line, deal with that, have a short-term CR, and finish it up and do one-year bills, which what they do, I'll speak frankly, yeah, they put guardrails on the spending. We say this is how the money is going to be spent, because with the Appropriations Committee, and we've hammered it out based on everybody's priorities. We hammer it out in those priorities. But that then now is being turned over to people who feel that they can move forward in a way that is unfettered. And I might add, again, we could have concluded this in December. It was a political decision by the Speaker of the House to push it to March 14th. And this is now where we are. And we can do this, we can still do it. I don't ever give up hope of getting to dealing with a year-long bill that represents the priorities of each and every member of this body, of all 433, 34, if it's 35.
Thank you. And I know, I just want to say in closing, it sounds like when we talk about guardrails, we're actually talking about complying with the Constitution, where Congress is saying how we should spend the money. And just also in conclusion, if this election was about lowering the cost, is there anything in this bill that lowers the cost of housing? Thank you, and with that, I yield back. There is nothing in this bill that lowers the cost of housing.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you back at the Rules Committee. I'll start on a lighter note, asking if you miss serving on this distinguished committee.
I do miss this. I miss my colleagues. I miss that splendid unused smoking room right next door. Yeah, no, it's a great committee, and you're all privileged to be part of it. I'm very happy I had the privilege of doing that.
Well, I'd like to first associate myself with your comments as it results to the vote tomorrow. It is truly a binary choice. We're either funding the government or we're shutting it down. We all, 432 of us, given some of the vacancies, have that opportunity tomorrow. So I very much associate yourself with those comments and your framing. But if I could ask, in your opening comments, you mentioned that this continuing resolution is very similar to the CR passed 3 months ago in December. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
And to the best of your recollection, did any Democrats vote against the CR in December?
No, I think every single Democrat in both chambers voted for it.
So to your point, just for the record, 196 Democrats voted for the CR in December, 1 voted present, 0 voted against it. So if I can ask you, Chairman Cole, why do you sense there's such fierce resistance now?
Well, look, I'm not here to question anybody's motives, but I think a lot of this is political. I think a lot of it is a reaction in December, to be fair. President Trump wasn't president. So I think a lot of this is directed at him and disagreements they have with what I would consider a legitimate exercise of executive authority. But doesn't change the consequences here. A vote, tomorrow, a no vote on a bill shuts down the government. It's pretty simple. And whatever your concerns are, I think what flows out of that for the American people, for whether our soldiers get paid in the field, our Border Patrol people get paid, our veterans get, well, we're advance funded, so we should be okay there. But the reality is, shutting down the government is not a good tactic, not a good thing, and I just hope members will think about that before they cast their votes tomorrow.
Well, I'll just close with a note and a question. I happen to proudly represent more airline pilots than anybody else in our country. I'm very close to the Atlanta airport. My district extends down to Columbus, Georgia. So one of the Democrat attacks on this CR that's certainly frustrated me is that this CR would result in less safe air travel. And I'd love to give you an opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to address that false claim.
That's a stretch when we actually put more money in the FAA. And look, we're very proud in Oklahoma. It's not in my district. It's immediately outside it. All air traffic controllers are trained in the Mike Maroney Center there. Secretary Duffy just went out there, said what a great job they're doing. Again, I know he's very serious about improving things, but there's nothing in here that makes things more difficult. There's actually something in here that puts additional resources toward that problem in the interim, and then I hope longer term, Congress will do more in this area. Actually, we began to do that 2 years ago. When I headed up, we actually put pretty major increases in the air traffic control system, but it takes many years to get us up to where. But this is actually a step in the right direction. It certainly doesn't. What will make air traffic much more dangerous is shutting down the government. Then you've got air traffic controllers who are not getting paid. you're just stopping progress. So, again, you can have individual agreements, but this is, you either keep the government open or you don't. And, I hope most people will vote to keep it open.
I agree wholeheartedly,
Will the
Madam
gentleman
Chairwoman.
yield for a moment?
Sure.
Sure, thank you very, very much. I just want to point out, and I don't know, I obviously was not present, but all of the news reports have said that there was a very heated conversation between Secretary Duffy and Elon Musk, where he said, "You are firing my air traffic controllers, and I have air it crashes and so forth. I can't deal with it." So the fact is that the secretary is concerned about what is going on and somebody making decisions about the wholesale firing of air traffic controllers. So the system is not safe because an individual who is unfettered can make a determination to fire air traffic controllers in a very difficult period of time. Thank you.
Well, if I may ask, Ranking Member, does this CR increase FAA spending from the last fiscal year?
What this does with the FAA is provide it with a blank check, a $4 billion blank check that allows Musk, I don't know if you heard me say this before, to direct contracts. He can direct the contracts to Starlink, to SpaceX, without any requirement for any kind of transparency, causing major disruptions to air travelers all across the country, across Florida, commercial airlines, forcing the airlines to divert air travel for thousands of travelers, costing thousands in lost revenue. So it is a serious issue with regard to what we need in terms of a safe safe airspace and the personnel to be able to deliver that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. DeGoosh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member, Chairman Cole, for being here for your testimony. Appreciate it. I will just say, neither here nor there, but I think it's a bit rich for folks to lecture us about votes on the CR when, I don't know, 30, 40 members of your caucus voted against the CR in December, including a near majority of the Republicans in the Rules Committee. I understand people have different intellectual rationales and reasons for their votes on these bills, but it's a little rich to endure the lecture like we just endured from one of our new colleagues, who perhaps wasn't aware. I don't know if he was here in December, but wasn't aware that so many of his own colleagues on his side of the aisle voted against the CR. But I digress. I want to ask you, Mr. Chairman, a couple of questions, and I missed the debate earlier. So just want to kind of level set that I'm understanding this CR correctly. The CR increases defense spending by $6 billion, that's right?
No. It increases by about 2.5.
$2.5 billion?
Correct.
Okay. And it cuts funding for non-defense programs and services by 13?
Not for programs, actually by, all the cuts are largely, and I do not enjoy saying this because I believe in them, but they're congressional projects. They're not programmatic funding.
I'm just trying to do a level set.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
trying to understand,
I
and I think for folks who are paying attention.
Realize where the cuts were coming from.
So whatever you want to call it,
Okay.
non-defense programs, non-defense
Correct.
spending is cut by roughly $13 billion.
Correct.
The CR does not include the $22.8 billion in FY26 advanced funding for the Toxic Exposure Fund.
That's correct. We think that should be dealt with in the 26 bill.
Got it, but it's not included in this bill.
That's correct.
Okay. You mentioned in your colloquy with my colleague on the Republican side, what's changed since December? I think he posed that question to you. What makes this CR different than the last? And we've gone through a couple of ways in which it is materially different. But of course, what also has changed, as you well know, are the serious concerns that members on my side of the aisle, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, some members on your side of the aisle, regarding the dismantling of federal agencies that the Trump administration has been engaged in and the purge of the federal workforce. And I take it you are concerned about some of that? Is that fair to say?
No, I'm not concerned. not in this bill. When I have concerns, I express my concerns.
Are you concerned about Doge's activities more broadly?
I'm sorry.
Are you concerned about Doge's activities more broadly?
No, I'm really not.
You're not
I
concerned?
If I can answer the question.
Sure.
No, I mean, because I think most of these things will be reviewed by cabinet agencies and will be looked at. And I think a lot of this needed to be, honestly, a light shown. And I think Mr. Norman actually listed a number of things that.
Here's why I ask, just simply.
Okay.
You were singing a very different tune a few days ago when Doge announced that they apparently were shutting down multiple federal installations in your district.
Correct.
Shutting down the Office of Social Security, shutting down the National Weather Service, shutting down the Indian Tribal Health Service.
Not in my district, but immediately outside.
In the state of Oklahoma, correct.
correct.
And you were apparently very concerned about Doge's activities in that regard, so concerned that you, according to what you tweeted out earlier this week, that you engaged the administration.
I did.
With your concerns. That sounds very different than what you said a moment ago, that you have no concerns, that you're just, this is just a spotlight, and that Doge is doing important work. But of course, that doesn't apply when they're trying to shut down the Social Security office in your district, right?
Correct. If I think they're right, look, when I was chairman of Labor H, we shut down a Job Corps center in my district.
Sure.
I'm the chairman.
So which Social Security
I could pretty
offices?
easily stop that.
Which Social Security offices
Can I
should they shut
finish
down?
my answer?
Sure.
In that case, I thought it was the right thing to do.
Got it.
I didn't like it. I'm a Job Corps supporter.
I appreciate that.
But that had underperformed for a lot of years. Now, at the end of the day, again, I think members, are free to advocate for what they believe, free to intervene, free to point out when somebody's wrong.
So I'm
In that
I am,
cases,
I'm
those
excited
cases,
for
I
you.
thought they were wrong, and I thought I was doing my job.
I'm excited for you, Mr. Chairman, and the people of Oklahoma that you convinced Elon Musk to not shut down the Social Security office in your district. Which Social Security offices should be shut down? Because apparently they've published a list. Mr. Let me finish, Ron. I gave you the courtesy.
There was one
I'll
target
give you
in
the
my
courtesy. Let me finish my statement.
Sure.
They have published a list, at least as of last week, of 47 different offices, Social Security offices across the country that they intended to shut down. You have succeeded, and I look forward to hearing more about your advocacy in this regard, in saving the Social Security office in your district. And I'm just simply asking, should that same courtesy extend to your colleagues from Indiana and from Georgia and from Texas who sit on the dais? Why is that office any better than my colleagues, the Republican colleagues on this committee who have offices in their districts?
If you contact and make your case, then it shouldn't. I mean,
Who'd you contact?
I contacted the relevant departments, actually.
Did you talk to Mr. Musk? Who'd you talk to at
We
Doge?
visited with Doge representatives as well.
Did that include Mr. Musk? I'm just curious.
No, not one-on-one.
What does that mean, not one-on-one?
No, I did not talk to
Okay,
him.
I'm just
I talked
curious.
to the staff over there at
I mean,
Doge.
maybe we can publish a guide for every member of Congress about what 24-year-old Doge staffer members should call to save the Social Security office in their district the way that Chairman Cole did. That might be something that would be of benefit, I think, to millions of Americans and their elected representatives here in Washington. You get my point, Mr. Cole. This is no way to run a federal government. In my view, it should not be simply by virtue of your stature and your position in the Republican Party that you're able to convince these folks that your office, this division, should be saved within your district. And Americans in all these other states.
The National Weather Center, there's only one of them. It's not hard to save it because its mission is pretty critical.
There are plenty of installations, there are plenty of facilities across the country that are either one or two or three that are not, we're not talking about wide swaths, that ultimately are on the chopping block. And I'm just simply suggesting to you, and I find it hard to believe that you wouldn't agree with me on this point, that this is no way to run the federal government, that essentially we should allow the administration to unilaterally dismantle different agencies, mass closures, mass purges, and then leave it to Republican members of Congress to ultimately call in and ask for a favor, ask for a waiver, and hopefully pull it off for their constituents.
I made my case.
Well, in any event, if that is the new way in which the federal government will operate.
Nothing new
I
about
fear
it.
for the precedent
You
it
haven't
sets
been
for
here
future
during
years,
a
but
BRAC
I'll digress.
process or something like that. That happens all the time. Things get closed.
I digress.
People agree or disagree.
I'm going to, I know the ranking member sounded like she wanted to expound upon that. I don't know if she would care to respond, but
You know, when we talk about that we didn't do anything with police in the District of Columbia, we did. That is clear, that there is the $1.1 billion cut to police, fire, AMT services, et cetera. I was just fascinated all of a sudden that one satellite weather service, I believe if you take a look at Project 2025, it calls for the elimination of NOAA. And the fact is they're moving to the elimination of NOAA, which would gives us the information that comes from the weather satellites so that we know what to do. I just want to make this, this point. It's true. People, and what I said earlier, and Mr. Noguchi, you were not here, and I'll deal with the Army Corps projects cut by $1.4 billion. And now with this one-year CR, we put those projects, where they go, how much funding they get, into the hands of Musk and Trump, President Trump, I don't want to be disrespectful, and Russ Vought. What funding is there? So if you happen to be high on the pecking order, you can call and say, whoa, my project needs to get done. My project needs to get done. This one needs to get done, depending on where you are in the pecking order of this body or this institution, okay? However, it's no longer in the prerogative of all of us making a determination. Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, making the determination of that level of funding and which projects get funded. It's in our hands. And that's what we're talking about, is giving all of that up. Giving that up. Why? I don't get it. One more final comment. Look, I say to my Republican colleagues, if you want to send legislative proposals to the Congress for deliberation, go ahead. Then members can vote whether they want to shutter offices or they want to cut funding. It is really unlawful to do this unilaterally, and that is what is happening here. That is what Musk and President Trump are doing. It is unilateral. We should be so strong to stand up and say no, no. And in terms of shutting the government down, if you don't want to negotiate, if the speaker says, no, it's this way or the highway, then that makes it where the shutdown decision is made, not on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with the ranking member, and I would just simply say we live in a constitutional republic in which the American people elect representatives to this body to make decisions with respect to funding the government. And the notion that now members are left to petition unnamed new special government employees in a new Department of Governmental Efficiency to decide whether or not a Social Security office is going to stay open in their district, to decide whether or not the National Weather Service, which has a facility in my district, whether NOAA, which has a large facility in my district, will be on the chopping block. That is not, in my view, consistent with, of course, past precedent, but fundamentally the spirit of the Constitution and the separation of powers. And I think it's unfortunate and deeply disheartening that so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I think, have taken what is very clearly a short-sighted view, and this assumption that their majorities and the political winds being what they are, that will last forever. And there won't come a day in which there is a Democratic president and a Democratic House or a Democratic Senate, and you will be living under the precedent that you have tragically created. There's still time, in my view, to pull back. The time for doing that would be now. But in the meantime, I know there are a few offices. I was just reading this a moment ago, and looks like in Elizabeth City, Franklin, Greenville, and Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, 4 Social Security offices closing. So, maybe Chairman Cole, you can give us the the 20-year-old Doge staffer that you talked to, give us their contact information, so perhaps the chairwoman can call them and petition President Trump to save those 4 offices among the other 47 Social Security offices that are being dismantled across the country. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to yield some time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I think my friend from Indiana, and I just quickly, Chairman Cole, to be very clear, there are about, to the best of your knowledge, about 1,200 Social Security offices across the country. Does that sound about right to you?
That sounds about right.
And so those at various field offices and so forth, and so there's a recommendation here to potentially, I don't know the full report yet, of, relocate or shut down or move or transition to other places, 40 or 50 of those offices. Your point, if I take it and put words in your mouth, is that any member of Congress in our elected capacity can go engage with the executive branch to say what we think the administration of government should look like and have some input as to whether something's impacting our district, correct?
Correct.
Is that what happened?
Correct?
And so to the extent that they're trying to figure out whether or not there's efficiency to be made, is the gentleman aware, and can he share and shed light on the fact that Social Security is slated to be bankrupt by 2032?
I certainly can. I mean, sadly, and this is something probably my ranking member and I do agree on, most people think we're the big spenders around here. We have, in 1981, when our mutual colleague, the Dean of the House, Hal Rogers, arrived here, the Appropriations Committee appropriated 45% of the budget, 9.8% of the gross national product. Today, we appropriate 26% of the budget and 6.4%. So we've actually lowered our share of spending on discretionary items. It's really the growth of entitlement programs which is driving spending.
And Social Security currently will be underwater come 2032 if we don't take action. Is that correct?
I think the interest rates have extended it to 2033.
33. So, and then last question on this point, because I think it merits a focus and consideration, is the President of the United States is in fact the chief executive, correct?
Yes.
Congress appropriates funds, which effectively means it's a ceiling, right? That's kind of the core essence of the Anti-Deficiencies Act and so forth, that you can't allow them to be able to go forward. So appropriations is saying, look, here are the dollars. But to the extent, like, without getting into the weeds on concepts of empowerment and otherwise, which refer to another conversation, it is not new, right? It dates back to founding days. Jefferson, for example, on empowerment. It is not new for the President of the United States to make decisions about how best to carry out the appropriations that we appropriate. The chief executive has latitude to make determinations about that to the extent not very specifically prohibited otherwise. Would that be a general characterization?
No, look, there's a constitutional implication here that I expect will be figured out in the courts. But to say that you don't have authority, look, we grant routinely any executive reprogramming authority.
Right.
Move money from here to there. It's done all the time. So if the executive comes back and says either conditions are changed or you may not have known about this, we look at it and say yes or no. So, and we grant some of that authority unilaterally. But, it's, again, I don't think saving money is a bad thing to do. I think that's probably one of the responsibilities of
I think the
executive.
chairman, I'll yield back to.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I don't necessarily have any questions at this time, but I just want to make something clear. House Republicans are leading, trying to keep the government funded. What we continue to hear from the other side is fear-mongering and grandstanding. It's really rich. One of my colleagues said it's rich that we had Republicans vote against a CR and that we're lecturing them. I think it's rich that the Democrats think they are the only ones allowed to give lectures around this building. We've also heard that this is no way to run the government. I argue that it's not a way to run the federal government, driving us $36 trillion in debt, and we've got to start to turn the fiscal trajectory around. And part of that is eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. That's not going to do the entire $36 trillion, but if we can save and stop wasting and fraudulently spending and abusively spending tax dollars, I think that we should try to do that. I don't think we should continue to fund a bloated bureaucracy. I think it's clear that the Democrats don't like President Trump. They don't like Doge. They don't like Republicans. They don't like being out of power. So I fully support the continuing resolution. I want to commend Chairman Cole for his leadership in advancing the legislation despite the Democrats' attempts to sow chaos and dysfunction. This CR is about governing responsibly by keeping the government open, ensuring our military remains fully funded, our border security efforts continue, and hard-earned taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Democrats spread fear and obsess over DOGE. This legislation continues funding and investments in roads, parks, water projects, infrastructure, research, and countless other core services. It includes fully funding the largest junior enlisted pay raise in over 40 years, the most significant increase since Ronald Reagan. It rescinds $20 billion in funding provided to the IRS under the Inflation Reduction Act and nearly $10 billion in funding from the Department of Commerce's Non-Recurring Expenses Fund. It includes $6 billion in mandatory funding for the Toxic Exposure Fund to fully meet veterans' health care needs. It provides $425 million for the Commodity Supplemental Food Program to deliver food packages to low-income senior adults, and $7.6 billion for the Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children, as requested by the administration. This continuing resolution provides the Department of Defense with additional resources and tools necessary to counter international terror threats by increasing defense discretionary spending by $6 billion while cutting non-defense discretionary spending by $13 billion. Additionally, Republicans are providing certainty to American patients and healthcare providers by extending expiring healthcare programs until the end of fiscal year through this legislation. If Democrats choose to vote for a government shutdown out of their contempt for President Trump, they are readying to hurt millions of Americans. It's a battle they previously lost to the American people, but they're refusing to accept. Under President Trump's leadership, we're restoring law and order, economic strength, and national security. Democrats would rather push fear tactics and shut down threats than support this measure that prioritizes the American people. House Republicans continue to support President Trump's agenda and are delivering results, not chaos. I urge my colleagues to support the resolution and continue the fight that 77 millions of Americans voted for. I want to thank Chairman Cole again for his work. I will close by just asking the chairman if he'd like to add anything that we haven't asked you here today.
Thank you very much, but no, it's been a long hearing. I think you've probably heard enough from me, so I'm more than happy to leave when you're ready to excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Houchin. I don't want to prolong this meeting too much, but I want to associate myself with the comments from Ms. Houchin and from my colleagues who have already spoken. I think fear-mongering is really a tame word to say what has gone on here today from our colleagues across the aisle. It's worse than fear-mongering, and I hope nobody, I'm glad we're not being shown on C-SPAN, because anybody who wants to learn something about civics in this country and the laws in this country sure would get a distorted picture of it. I do want to make one quick sort of affirmation of one thing Ms. Houchin said. When we present facts, we are not lecturing. We are bringing the facts out. And I think that's what we've done. I do want to ask the chairman a question. A lot has been made of the fact that in the Veterans Toxic Exposure Fund, you've mentioned that money for FY26 was not included in this continuing resolution, as evidently it has been in others. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is there any money for FY26 in any of the other line items here?
Boy, you're asking a big question.
It's not
As
typical.
a rule, no, it's unusual when we do these things, but again, certainly not unprecedented. No, by and large, this is money for 25.
Okay. And that's what we should be putting out in this to be appropriate, correct?
In my view, yes, but look, I also put stock in the argument that my friends have made, there's certain critical services. Usually you like to forward fund, so they're not at risk.
Indian Health Services.
We do, well, I worked hard to get that.
I know, but I'm saying, but Indian Health Services is
and-
advanced funded.
but
Some other
actually,
veterans
a lot
programs
of-
are advanced funded.
Miss,
I hear you, but I have to answer it.
And I may be incorrect in this, I think the rest of veterans is forward funded. This is a kind of moving target. It's a, we're having a hard time getting our hands around exactly how severe this problem is. Did we get a rush of cases that at the beginning, because it's a relatively new benefit? But again, that's an appropriate thing for the Appropriations Department to work for. Look, I voted for the PAC Act, so I certainly want to make sure it's well-funded, and we will over the course of our normal deliberations.
And I think, again, it's important to talk about, on March 9th, 2024, President Biden signed into law H.R. 4366, Consolidated Appropriations Act 2024. Then on March 23rd, 2024, another bill signed by the president. And then that got us through December 20th. And then on December 20th, we passed H.R. 10545 to take us through March. Those were not unlawful things that were done. This has been categorized as an unlawful act by the House of Representatives, by our colleagues. So were all of these continuing resolutions unlawful, Mr. Chairman?
No, they're lawful. They're certainly within the authority of Congress. They're not the preferred method. Preferred method, which I think we all would agree on, is 12 bills done in full on time. Our committee produced that product out of the committee before the August break. And we, I'm not saying we did a great job in the House, but we did a better job in the Senate, which didn't pass a single bill, got them across. So it's something clearly we need to work on. And we ought to think about that. And again, my colleague and I agree on this. I wish we'd gotten this done before President Trump became president. He shouldn't have had to be worried about this. He shouldn't. I mean, we should have been funded through September 30th, but we didn't get that done.
I would like to stay within 5 minutes if I could, and I want to point out that Section 7, let me make sure I'm in the right place, of Article 1, Section 7, this is where the issue of we have the power of the purse comes up all the time.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people have to be reminded of exactly what this says. It says, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. Every bill which should have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become law, be presented to the President of the United States. So there's a misrepresentation of the role of the House in some people wanting to say, we have total control over how the money is spent. That is not true. It's just like every other bill, the bills have to go to the Senate and then be signed by the President. So I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for being here today, and I yield back my time.
Please read Antonin Scalia on the power of the purse, where it goes. Judge Scalia was not actually a liberal, flaming liberal activist. He opined on this.
We thank the panel for being here, and you're excused.
Thank you. Wow, God, let's misread the Constitution as well. Oh.
I now welcome our second panel, Representative Carey and Representative Davis, who's a long-suffering, sat through the other hearing from the Committee on Ways and Means. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Carey, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern, for considering H.R. 1156, the Pandemic Unemployment Fraud Enforcement Act. An H.J. Resolution 25, my joint resolution disapproving and of also repealing the last-minute DeFi broker rule. Last Congress, the Ways and Means Committee held a series of hearings to examine how fraud in COVID-era unemployment insurance programs. What we actually discovered was shocking. Instead of going to support workers and their families during the crisis, this money was being stolen by organized crime groups, including street gangs, foreign-backed international scammers using large-scale, sophisticated identity theft schemes. We also learned that some of these same groups are continuing to perpetrate UI fraud targeting disaster unemployment assistance. Fraudsters are also filing claims on behalf of individuals impacted by the California fires and the North Carolina floods, when then using the money for their criminal activity. According to the government estimates, between 100 and 135 billion of UI benefits were stolen during the pandemic. Outside estimates range as high as 400 billion. So far, the government has only recovered about 5 billion. As we sit here, there are over 157,000 open fraud UI hotline complaints and more than 1,600 ongoing fraud investigation. This is a must-pass bill. The statute of limitations expires in 17 days on March 27th. If we do not extend it, the criminals who stole money from the pockets of taxpayers will get away with it and continue to target American citizens and rob our governmental programs. This legislation was widely supported by federal law enforcement agencies across the states, including the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, the Department of Justice, and the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. I ask that you join them in supporting this legislation while there is still time so that we can show American people that Congress is serious about protecting their hard-earned tax dollars. I'd also go on to the crypto CRA rules. I want to say thank you again to the chairwoman and the ranking member for considering my joint resolution disapproving of and repealing the last-minute DeFi broker rule. This common sense resolution has broad bipartisan support. And I say that because, as evidenced the Senate last week, there were 51 Republicans and 18 Democrats and 1 independent who voted for it. The DeFi broker rule is not only unfair to American digital asset holders and entities, but is also unworkable given the structure of the DeFi exchanges. If allowed to go into effect, the DeFi broker rule will place a massive burden on the approximate 1 in 4 Americans today who actually own cryptocurrency, and on the IRS, which will be responsible for processing billions of new tax filings. The IRS also does not have the authority to issue this rule. While the rules stem from specific instructions in the 2021 infrastructure law, nowhere in that law did Congress give the IRS the power to set invasive reporting standards for individual digital asset holders and software platforms that support DeFi digital asset transactions. Yet, that's exactly what the IRS did. The laws Congress passed should be interpreted and implemented fairly, not used to gain more control over taxpayers and the economy. Not only is it unfair to the American workers and companies, but it also just doesn't work. As mentioned, DeFi brokers don't collect the information from the users needed to implement the rule. And even if it were possible to comply with the regulations, DeFi exchanges would need to spend billions of dollars to alter their business models and to meet the IRS reporting requirements, essentially destroying the industry. So, by all appearance, this rule is a solution in search of a problem. It dulls Americans' competitive edge in the cryptocurrency and digital asset markets, and it places a significant burden on taxpayers and the platform providers that would ultimately cripple the digital asset industry. I appreciate your consideration for this bipartisan resolution for a vote on the House floor, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Mr. Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chair Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Rules Committee. I speak today in opposition to the two bills as reported by the Committee on Ways and Means, H.R. 1156 and H.J. Res 25. I also speak in support of my amendment to H.R. 1156. With regard to H.R. 1156, Democrats have fought to give the Department of Labor Inspector General, or OIG, all the tools it needs to prosecute criminals who stole from our unemployment insurance system during the pandemic, both resources and time to investigate and prosecute. And that's why I am so disappointed by the majority's choice to advance a partisan bill that could put both fraud fighting and our constituents at risk instead of working with us on a bipartisan basis. This bill would give the OIG 5 additional years to file charges for alleged fraud, whether the charges are against a criminal mastermind who used stolen data to steal millions of dollars, or against a struggling parent who accidentally overpaid by an overworked worker state employment system. On January 24, President Trump illegally fired Larry Turner, who had led the OIG in securing 1,400 convictions and over $1 billion in court-ordered restitution. His firing opens the risk that the powerful tool could be abused to enable 4 years of harassment for our constituents by people like billionaire Elon Musk, who has been aggressively snooping in our most confidential databases and making unsubstantiated allegations of fraud against Social Security recipients and American workers. In addition to the risk of Musk harassment, this bill would cut a small but important source of anti-fraud funding at the Department of Labor. Democrats have offered several compromises to support fraud prosecution while ensuring it is not abused. Mr. Thompson offered an amendment to strike the fraud fighting cut. Ms. Chu and Ms. Delbene offered an amendment to extend the statute of limitations for 6 months, but make the remaining extension contingent on having a Senate-confirmed Inspector General. And I've filed an amendment with Representatives Chu, Moore, Evans, and Gomez to limit the extension to cases with an expected recovery of at least $100,000, which is the standard the IG and prosecutors have been using as a safeguard against abuse under new leadership. Adoption of these amendments would make H.R. 1156 a bill that I and other Democrats could support. I hope my colleagues will reconsider their insistence on a partisan path for this bill. Regarding House Joint Resolution 25, all taxpayers are required to pay tax when they sell securities at a gain. When Congress passed its infrastructure bill in 2022, it included as a pay-for bill that required IRS reporting for cryptocurrency transactions. This type of reporting is essential to ensuring that taxpayers voluntarily comply to meet their tax obligations. H.J. Res 25 would remove the portion of the Biden administration's regulations that pertain to decentralized exchanges. To do so would leave a huge gap in these reporting requirements. In fact, the Joint Committee on Taxation estimated that the U.S. Treasury will lose $4 billion as a result of this bill. As I look at this bill, I believe that it weakens the Internal Revenue Service's ability to detect and reduce cheating, and by bolstering decentralized exchanges, which are far less regulated than other exchanges, I believe that it has the potential to aid nefarious criminal activity, such as sales of fentanyl and human trafficking. In short, this is an unpaid-for $4 billion giveaway to wealthy crypto traders with the potential for side effects that are much worse. For these reasons, I do not support this bill. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. Representative Carey, I begin by turning to the CRA before us. As you know, the IRS's rule is being challenged because it expands beyond the authority that Congress granted it in the largely partisan infrastructure law passed by Congress in 2021, and you said that in your opening comments. But despite what our Democrat colleagues might say, this isn't a binary issue, is it? If we repeal the rule, couldn't Congress come back to the table on this issue on a bipartisan basis and work to find a solution to addressing tax avoidance in this digital asset space?
You are correct. The CRA just does not give the Trump administration the authority to address tax avoidance in the digital space, digital asset space at all.
Okay.
It simply nullifies the last-minute Biden rule. However, by repealing the DeFi broker rule, the Trump administration could attempt to issue new rules to address tax avoidance in the digital asset space.
Right, and it would really focus on what needs to be focused on here. So the intent of the provision of law that authorized this rulemaking was supposed to be a revenue generator, is that correct?
That's correct.
But in fact, we expect the burden placed upon the IRS to eat much of the $10 billion tax gap that this rule is trying to close, is that correct?
That is correct.
And this comes on top of billions of dollars projected for industry compliance, is that correct?
That's correct.
And now I'll turn to H.R. 1156. I'm honestly a bit shocked to see this legislation to come to this committee on a partisan basis. I'd expect Democrats to be supportive of this ongoing effort to recover funds from outright fraud. But here we are. Can you tell us about the universe of ongoing fraud cases and why this extension of statute of limitations is so desperately needed?
Madam Chairwoman, as we sit here, the Department of Labor, and I said in my opening statement, has over 157,000 UI fraud hotline complaints, and the Department of Justice reports more than 1,648 of them are open and uncharged criminal matters. It's pretty big numbers.
So the IG didn't seem to do a very good job of getting to this money that had been taken illegally, correct?
That's correct. I mean, these are sophisticated fraud schemes involving gangs, Russian mobsters, Chinese government-linked hackers from Nigeria, really all at the American taxpayer expense.
We've had the devastation of Hurricane Helene, and we know that people have applied for disaster unemployment through FEMA, and the Department of Justice and North Carolina Disaster Information have warned of potential scams. How much do we know about continuing fraud in these programs?
Well, we know that this is still happening, as you just pointed out, and it's the same with the fraudsters that are committing the UI fraud during the same pandemic, particularly in North Carolina flood victims, to claim disaster unemployment assistance. As witnesses at one of our hearings in February actually told us directly, it is the same groups that are doing the same things using the same playbook. This bill would provide more time to prosecute criminals and stop the cycle of fraud.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Davis, did you want to add anything?
Well, the only thing that I would say is that Democrats are unequivocally and without a doubt interested in waste, fraud, and abuse, and collecting every penny that is due the federal government from taxpayers. However, we're not interested in harassing individuals, small taxpayers who may have been overpaid or may have filled out a form incorrectly. And the bill that we're really talking about is based upon the recommendation from the fired Inspector General. And while you can always do better, but 1,400 convictions is not a bad record. And you can always do more, but you can do more with more. And if we continue to fire and get rid of the individuals who can do the job, then of course we know that you're not going to collect as much and you're not going to be as effective.
Well, I think your amendments are reasonable. I'm surprised that my Republican friends didn't jump at the opportunity to actually be bipartisan, but I think we see a pattern that is developed here, that if they could avoid bipartisanship at all costs, they do. And I think that's what was happening with the continuing resolution, which we shouldn't call a continuing resolution because it's not a continuing resolution. It's a very partisan bill that is 99 pages long, not a continuation of just what we had going before. But in any event, we'll offer your amendment in the Rules Committee, but again, I think this place will work a lot better if there's a commitment to bipartisanship and not just take it or leave it. But anyway.
Thank you very much. We always hold out hope. There's still time and there's still possibility. And so we hope that we can do bipartisan work, and that's what we attempt to do as much as possible. So we still have hope that it could happen.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Ms. Fishman.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to you both for being here tonight. And thank you in particular, Mr. Carey, for bringing, in particular, HR 1156 forward, because I do think it's an important part of the work that we do protecting taxpayer dollars. But as we are looking forward, we are trying to make sure that we get at the waste, fraud, and abuse. And so it's incredibly important. And don't have any questions, but thank you both, and thank you again. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I expect that everyone sitting on this dais is against fraud, waste, or abuse in the federal government, and we should do everything that we can to go after folks who abuse the pandemic assistance programs to take money that was meant for people actually in need. But, in the last 2 months, President Trump has fired nearly all of the top civil servants tasked with identifying that waste and fraud. If our Republican colleagues were serious about going after fraud, waste, and abuse, they wouldn't remain silent while Trump fires the government's inspectors general, including the inspector general whose job it was to go after fraud in the pandemic unemployment insurance program, as well as those who had written reports exposing abuse and misconduct by Elon Musk companies and the Trump administration. And if Republicans were sincere about going after fraud, they wouldn't have cut funding for the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, which led to layoffs of the civil servants whose jobs it was to bring cases against people who defrauded the pandemic unemployment insurance program. You can't go on TV and say you're against fraud, but not also be against politically motivated firings of the people who are responsible for policing that fraud. You can't have it both ways. So by the same token, I am deeply skeptical of the Republicans' Congressional Review Act resolution that would nullify rules that help ensure that crypto investors pay the taxes that they owe. I agree with the chairwoman's suggestion that Congress should regulate this space. We can and should debate the proper regulatory scheme for stablecoins and crypto assets. We should debate the right amount of taxes to collect. We should debate the rates for the capital gains tax. and the corporate profits tax. And when we've determined the proper regulatory scheme, we can repeal this oversight tool if it's no longer useful. But until then, we shouldn't make it easier for people to break the law, defraud Americans, and evade their tax obligations. Nullifying this rule will make it easier for crypto investors, who of course famously include the president and Elon Musk, to skip on their tax bills. And there's a mountain of evidence that crypto assets are explicitly being used to evade taxes and in many cases to launder the proceeds from illegal activity. We should be scrutinizing crypto exchanges more, not less, especially when we see story after story linking these exchanges to the laundering of funds used by organized crime and drug traffickers. The CRA is bad policy. I hope we can redirect our focus to bipartisan reforms to promote innovation and counter illegal uses of crypto assets. I yield back.
Scanlon, Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
I yield.
Thank you. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
You know, I would just note that Republicans keep saying we need to cut spending for farmers, hungry kids, veterans, all kinds of important programs, especially programs that impact rural America. They say we have to cut all this funding so we can cut the deficit. But I just want to note for the record that the so-called party of fiscal responsibility is going to overturn a regulation, and in doing so would increase the deficit by an estimated $4.5 billion. So they're going to help out the crypto boys, and in doing so, cost the taxpayers $4.5 billion. And they're going to do so saying, oh, but, you know, we can't really help those hungry kids. We can't really help those people on Medicaid. You know, that health care from veterans, well, that's too expensive. But helping out the crypto bros, who I might know, gave $11 million in donations to Trump's inaugural committee. Because with this administration, you really always just have to follow the money. Who will profit, who gave Trump money, and who is in charge. And that's who it appears Republicans stand with. The hypocrisy is just out, I mean, it leaves me speechless sometimes. But Representative Davis, is there anything you'd like to add about the bills we were seeing here today?
I think the important aspects of the bill, and I think we reinforce the idea and the fact that we do want to punish those individuals who are attempting and making efforts to defraud the federal government, to take away resources that ought to be available for individuals in need, and that there is no doubt we don't want anybody to think that we don't. But we also don't want to see individuals harassed because of errors, having been overpaid. They had nothing to do with it, and they get charged with criminal activity. So we just want a balanced approach to it. Thank you very much for your question, and yes.
Thank you, Representative Davis. And with regards to describing the regulations regarding the reporting by brokers that regularly provide services effectuating digital asset sales, these were a long time in coming. August 29th, 2023, was one of the initial publications. And so these were regulations that had been under consideration, that received input, that were intended to make sure that we collected all the taxes that are owed and due. And to now overturn a regulation so that it's not going to be as easy and it's going to be difficult to collect those taxes is, I think, irresponsible. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Let me see. Mr. Norman, you're recognized. Ms. Houchin. Gentlemen, that there are no further questions from the panel. And with that, we will excuse you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
She's waiting outside.
Okay.
You can recognize her, she comes in.
Okay. Mr. Moylan, you're recognized. I believe you will have a colleague joining you in a moment. I'm not sure where she is. Go ahead, Mr. Moylan. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to testify today on the continuing resolution. Funding the general government is not only an obligation, but one of Congress' core constitutional responsibilities. This CR accomplishes that responsibility and has core funding increases to support national security, our veterans, and provides additional $500 million for the WIC program. This is good. And it also increases Department of Defense spending, would fully fund the pay raise for our junior enlisted service members, which I proudly supported in last Congress in the 2025 NDAA. This ensures that our service members can focus on protecting our country rather than worrying about paying rent or putting food on the table. Again, these are all good. And a key portion of the defense spending increases our supports the infrastructure for Guam, our most western soil in the Indo-PACOM area of the United States. This CR moves forward funding for roadway repairs, which will replace bridges, repaved roads, and underground power lines. There's also funding to repair the glass breakwater, which is one typhoon away from being destroyed, by including the $600 million of additional congressional funding to protect our harbor and commerce. Also, of concern, the increase in missile defense funding. I've worked so hard to be moving forward. So now the CR also supports our veterans by fully funding veterans' health care and includes $6 billion for Toxic Exposure Fund. This assists veterans with service-related exposures and reaffirms our contract with our veterans to provide health care and compensation for injuries related to service. This is good, again. However, the bill does not secure funding for CPFs, which members on both sides of the aisle count on for communities across our nation. Projects under DOJ Burn Grant Program, like X-ray scanners for Guam's Customs and Quarantine Agency, and funds for additional police vehicles for Guam Police Department, are not included in this measure. Now, this is a problem, and these projects are critical for ensuring that we put America first. Investing in our communities promotes our national interests and shows the federal government's commitment to local groups and agencies that are the backbone of our country. Projects for our public safety officers protects Guam's public safety and assist in counter-narcotics operations and secure our shores. Likewise, the CR would decrease construction funding for Army Corps of Engineer projects. These projects, authorized under the Water Resource Development Act last Congress, may also negatively impact U.S. ACE projects that have a distinct overlap with national security. Ensuring our communities are protected against disasters, both natural and man-made. So I respectfully ask the committee and urge the committee to support my amendments that ensure construction projects authorized under WARDA and the DOJ OJP burn grants remain funded under this CR. I thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moylan. We appreciate your appearing before us today. Oh, excuse me. Does any member have a question? I'll start with Ms. Fishback's not here. Mr. Roy? Mr. Langworthy? Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Scott? Mr. Griffith? Okay. Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Without objection, the committee stands in recess until 15 minutes after the close of the last vote. Thank you very much. We will be in recess. The committee will reconvene. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.J. Res. 25, H.R. 1156, or H.R. 1968? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion of our meeting. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. Fishbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move the committee grant H.J. Res. 25, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5, United States Codes of the Rule, submitted by the Internal Revenue Service relating to the gross proceeds reporting by brokers that regularly provide services of effectuating digital asset sales, a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. The rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means or their respective designees. The rules provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 1156, the Pandemic Unemployment Fraud Enforcement Act, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against the consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means, now printed in the shall be considered as adopted and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of orders against the provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means or their respective designee. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 1968, the Full Year Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act 2025, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of orders against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member of the Appropriations, the Committee on Appropriations or the respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. Finally, the rule provides that each day for the remainder of the first session of the 119th Congress shall not constitute a calendar day for purposes of Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act with respect to a joint resolution terminating a national emergency declared by the President on February 1, 2025.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or an amendment to the rule?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
All right, 3 completely closed rules. How Russian. But I'd like to ask I request unanimous consent to insert written testimony from Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton in support of Amendment Number 2 to H.R. 1968. Amendment Number 2 would allow the District of Columbia to continue to spend under fiscal year 2025 local budget enacted by D.C. and exempt D.C. from a federal government shutdown in fiscal year 2026.
Without objection.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order Amendment Number 1 to H.R. 1968 offered by Delegate Norton, which allows the District of Columbia to continue to spend under the fiscal year 2025 local budget enacted by D.C. and exempts D.C. from a federal government shutdown in fiscal year 2026. Madam Chairwoman, D.C. passed a budget for fiscal year 2025. The September CR introduced by Chairman Cole allowed D.C. to spend at the levels of their proposed fiscal year 2025 budget. The December CR introduced by Chairman Cole allowed D.C. to spend at those same levels. Now, after telling D.C. their spending at these levels has been fine for 6 months, this Republican CR is telling them to go back to fiscal year 2024 spending levels. This will result in a cut to the district spending by more than $940 million, close to $1 billion. Law enforcement, cops, and safety will be cut by nearly $240 million. Education by nearly $400 million. These cuts will be devastating and through no fault of the district. And let me remind you that this is D.C.'s money. It's not federally funded. It's not congressional funded. It's funded by D.C. businesses and residents who do not have a vote in the Congress, I might add. So I hope my colleagues would at least vote to allow this amendment to be brought to the floor, to be debated and voted on.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a roll call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I have another amendment to the rule.
Gentleman's recognized.
I move the committee strike Section 4 of the resolution, which prevents the House of Representatives from voting on Trump's tariffs. Madam Chair, the President has gone after two of our allies who happen to be our closest neighbors, and it's the American people who are going to suffer most. The President's tariffs will cost families an extra $1,200 a year. The S&P 500 fell 3.1% this week, its largest decline since September. Ontario is hitting us with a 25% electricity surcharge, one that affects the gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy's home state. These tariffs are devastating for businesses and for families. That's why Ranking Member Meeks and House Democrats introduced resolutions to actually let the House vote on these tariffs. But guess what? In this rule, Republicans are shutting those resolutions off. Why are they sneaking this unrelated provision into this rule? I'll tell you why. Because they're scared to vote on it. They want no floor vote, no Republicans on record, and no way to stop these devastating price hikes. That's why I'm offering this motion to simply allow us to have a vote on President Trump's authority and these tariffs. If this amendment is not adopted, Madam Chair, then a yes vote on the rule, vote tomorrow, will be a yes vote to ratify these tariffs. And I think all of my Republican friends who vote yes, you are voting to support these tariffs. So let us be clear. And with that, I yield back.
I recognize myself. President Trump is using every tool at his disposal to protect Americans. In this case, the administration found that the extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl, constitutes a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. If you listen to Democrats in Congress, they refuse to debate the exact issue of illegal immigration and drugs constituting a national emergency. They want only to debate President Trump's enforcement mechanism, tariffs. But let's look at the Democrats' record of not using every tool to protect Americans, leading to a border emergency that has truly become a national emergency. The goal is not to have tariffs for tariffs' sake, but to solve these border-related problems. We must give them a chance. What would be truly unprecedented is Congress upending tariff policy to score political points when it has never gotten involved in this level of executive branch micromanagement before. We need to provide certainty to the administration as it negotiates with foreign powers. President Trump's record with tariffs is one of unbridled success. Tariffs resolved security concerns in Colombia, ushered in historic bilateral agreements with China, and secured the border with Mexico. Again, we cannot have Congress micromanage trade policy and rob the president of the negotiating power he is using to secure our interest.
Madam Chair?
Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, I'm sure that the families who see their electricity bills going up by 25% are comforted by that statement, but the reality is people are being hurt by these tariffs. The costs for people are going through the roof. as we speak. And look, all of us here believe that fentanyl is a problem. But I'm going to tell you, to say that Canada is the problem for fentanyl when we know most fentanyl enters this country through legal ports of entry in the United States, but we're hitting Canada with this. I mean, I don't quite understand it. But the bottom line is, again, I mean, we have this ability, I mean, to be able to ask for a vote on this. It is now being taken away from us. At the same time, Elon Musk and this administration is infringing on the authority of the United States House of Representatives, and nobody around here wants to defend this institution. I mean, I mean, if this were Joe Biden doing what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing, you guys would, wouldn't be able to control yourselves. But as we speak, there are thousands of people who are being laid off, and I believe illegally, and I think courts are now coming to that conclusion as well. All we're asking for is to have a debate and a vote on this, and to shut this little procedure off in this rule on the continuing resolution, I think is wrong, and I hope that we can have a vote on this.
I'll recognize myself again. To be clear, offering a resolution to nullify the national emergency is what would be offered. It wouldn't be to preclude terrorists from the equation. It would be to turn off the national emergency entirely. Is that really your position, that fentanyl and related illegal immigration aren't constituting a national emergency? At a time when most Americans are dying from fentanyl overdoses every year than were lost during the entirety of the war in Vietnam, for Americans ages 18 to 45, it's the leading cause of death. If you want to remove tariffs as an enforcement mechanism, then go ahead and offer a bill to amend the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. You have the power to attack the use of tariffs by legislating effectively. But I'm for granting the Trump administration the appropriate negotiating power the president needs to build upon his successful use of tariffs.
Well, Madam Chair, I would just respond very quickly by simply saying that one suggestion to this administration is don't pardon people who receive life sentences for bringing fentanyl into this country, number one. Number two, don't be cutting off health care benefits, going after Medicaid during this unprecedented fentanyl crisis. And thirdly, if you think that this is a bad thing to do, then you can vote no on it on the House floor. But this is supposed to be the House of Representatives, and we're supposed to be able to debate issues and not just sweep everything under the rug because, the fearless leader doesn't want to have any discussion on any of this stuff. So again, I would urge a yes vote on my amendment.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Roy?
As the chair knows, we have been dealing with the crisis in Texas as a direct consequence of the failure of the Biden administration to secure the border, but worse yet, to purposefully exploit the border for partisan political purposes, endangering the people that I represent, leading directly to the deaths of the people that I represent and people throughout the state of Texas and this country. Fentanyl being a core part of that. The record is replete for the flow of fentanyl from China through Mexico and Canada into our country. And what we have done here, and by the way, at our request in the House, that the extension of this, I guess, waiver or whatever on being able to bring the bill to the floor would only be through the end of this session, through the end of December, and not for the entirety of the Congress, but to allow the president the time to be able to use his authority to be able to go and engage in diplomacy to pressure and push on Mexico and Canada and China to uphold their end of the bargain to stop flowing fentanyl into our communities. That is a reasonable position for us to take to give the president the authority as the commander-in-chief and as the chief executive to be able to do that. That is what this does. It is for extension of just over 9 months to be able to allow the decision by the president to declare a national emergency and use the tools at his disposal, which includes tariffs for diplomacy purposes, to be able to try to stop the flow of this dangerous product into our communities and kill Americans. That's what's at stake here. I yield back.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm glad that the gentleman believes that you guys should decide for the entire House what we should do on this issue. And again, with all due respect, I don't recall Canada being the focus of all this talk on fentanyl in the past. So, but here's the deal. I mean, if you guys want these tariffs, you can vote for them, and you will have that opportunity in the Rules Committee.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Scanlon.
I do think that this is an issue on which we should have debate because we have another national emergency brewing, as imposing tariffs on our closest allies is now causing our stock market to have the worst day yet this year. We're hearing alarm signals about recession. And we, as the ranking member mentioned, the amount of fentanyl that's coming into this country from Canada is far out of proportion to the economic disruption that the president has imposed on all of us. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez.
Madam Chair, I'm just astounded by the manner in which this committee and indeed the Republican House leadership, and apparently if they all vote for this tomorrow, all of the Republicans have decided to give away all of their power to the presidency and to Musk. And this rule does that with the funding, and then with this provision, every single Republican who votes for this is indeed voting for a continuation of the tariffs. And you can say it's about fentanyl, but the reality, even President Trump keeps changing his mind about why is he imposing these tariffs. And it's like a temper tantrum war, right? It's the Trump's temper tantrum with regards to tariffs. The only problem is when he does that, he sends our stock market crashing. He doesn't seem to care about an impending recession. And I need to tell you, I often speak for women and their issues, and we cannot afford Trump and his tariffs. He is causing our grocery bills to soar. He will cause our gasoline prices, especially in the middle part of the country, where many of you represent, to go up. And nobody wants these. The American public are not supportive of these tariffs. But you will all be voting to support these tariffs by this interesting little section 4 here. And we will call you upon it because you were voting for tariffs that are increasing costs on American families, and our grocery bills are going to go up because of you. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed
Ask for a roll call vote.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there further discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
Ms. Scanlon.
I move the committee make in order amendment number 10 to H.R. 1968 offered by Representative Friedman, which expresses the sense of Congress affirming the constitutional authorities and duties of Congress and the President in appropriating and dispersing funds as enacted into law. Madam Chairwoman, the first 2 months of the Trump administration have seen chaos, confusion, and litigation, and as the President and Elon Musk have attempted to gut or dismantle large swaths of the federal government. They've fired federal workers who are in charge of preventing the spread of Ebola or avian flu and guarding our nuclear weapons, only to be forced to rehire them. They've accidentally disclosed the identities and locations of CIA assets. They've attempted to freeze all federal funding and fire huge numbers of civil servants on illegal pretexts, including exemplary employees who were just promoted. They pretended that they have the power of the purse and that they can repeal federal laws unilaterally, ruling without the hassle of democracy. But under our democracy, cutting corners isn't just frowned upon, it's actually unconstitutional. So this amendment is simple. It simply reiterates that the constitutional role of Congress to appropriate government funds and that the executive's role is to disperse those funds as the law requires and as the Supreme Court has held and Congress has legislated in the past. So why not allow an up or down vote on this amendment unless you don't want your members to go on record stating the simple constitutional fact that it is Congress and not the administration that has the power of the purse. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The
I would
amendment's
ask for a roll call vote. Thank you.
Ms. Scanlon requests a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Ledger Fernandez?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 24 to H.R. 1968 offered by Representative Nadler to include advance funding for fiscal year 26 for the cost of War Toxic Exposures Fund. Many of us know this as the burn pits. Madam Chairman, our veterans who earned their health care through their sacrifices on the battlefield are worried, and they should be. They're being fired by the thousand by Musk and Doge. Their private information is being accessed by Doge. And now with this bill, you fail to include the $22 billion in fiscal year 2026 advance appropriations that will be needed for the Veterans Toxic Exposure Fund. The House Republicans included this money in their bill last year. You included it last year. So forgive us for worrying about your intentions after it's been intentionally pulled from this bill. You know, Congress is giving Musk and Doge the authority to cut any programs at the agencies that they wish with this bill. Musk and Doge simply do not honor or respect our veterans, as demonstrated by the way in which they've been treated in the last 7 weeks. Our veterans deserve more. This amendment would guarantee our veterans they will have their health care after November 1st. And this is a tradition of what we've done with VA, so don't say it's nothing. It is a deviation from a practice that we have instituted in Congress. So we ask you, stand with our veterans and not with Musk. And with that, I urge support of my amendment, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Hey, Madam Chair, I have one final amendment about something that just came to my attention in the manager's amendment. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike the portion of the rule self-executing, and not even a vote on this amendment, but self-executing the manager's amendment, which strips language from the bill that would have increased the number of visas available for our Afghan allies in the Special Immigrant Visa Program. Madam Chairwoman, maybe you can explain to me what the hell this manager's amendment is. I don't, because it seems to me that what you all are doing here is turning your backs on Afghan nationals who helped us during the war and whose lives are at risk because of it. And the Afghan Special Immigrant Visa Program was established to provide a life-saving path to safety for Afghan nationals who face serious danger as a result of helping the United States. I signed a bipartisan letter. It was a bipartisan letter in December led by Representative Crow asking for an increase in visas from 50,500 to 70,500 and to extend the program to December of 2027. I was pleased to see that this language was included in this CR. Now, at the last minute, the majority has dropped a manager's amendment to strip the language. And why? I know you're going to say, oh, this is fine. It's like your toxic exposure funding excuse. We'll deal with it later. And we know how good Congress is at dealing with things later. Well, this was dealing with it. The language was in there. And now I'm reading that Trump may include Afghanistan in a brand new travel ban. What a coincidence. So you're turning your backs on our Afghan allies in service of whom, whose service was into our country. And the Trump administration and another one of its offensive travel bans may be responsible for this. But I think this is truly unbelievable. I think all of us, no matter what our politics may be, thought that it was important to make sure we were there for the people who were there for us during that terrible war. And so I would urge my colleagues to support my amendment.
Madam Chair? Yeah, I need to speak in support of this amendment. I worked on behalf of these folks who were promised safe passage and green cards to our country when they volunteered to be drivers and interpreters for our troops during that conflict. And it takes an awful lot of work, and it takes years to get them vetted and get them here. We saw with the first days of the Trump administration, they canceled flights. They prevented people who had been fully vetted and should have been allowed entry to this country. So these people need our help more now than ever, and so I would support this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment, Mr.
Madam Chair, I want to read for the committee exactly what General McKenzie testified. I'll give you my honest opinion and view shaped my recommendations to the President, then President Biden. I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan and also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government. The reason we're having this discussion is because then President Joe Biden ignored the advice of his military commanders. With that, I yield.
Madam Chair, even if that is true, it has nothing at all to do with what we're talking about here right now. You had in this CR language that would protect these refugees, and it's been removed. It was in the CR, it's been removed in the manager's amendment. So I appreciate, your rhetoric, but the reality is it has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
That's Democrat word for the truth, right?
No,
when we tell the truth, you call it rhetoric, and that's why you're in the minority now.
What does it have to do with this? You blame Biden for what? This amendment? All right, good. Then vote for this amendment and blame Biden. That's fine. But this has nothing. But I want to know why this was removed.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Roy.
One of the reasons that we have concerns about the SIV visas is, for example, Chairman Mark Green, in a letter, demanded the committee is seeking information about the recent reported arrest of 2 Afghan nationals living in Oklahoma City who allegedly plotted an ISIS-inspired terrorist attack for Election Day. According to the unsealed criminal complaint, Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi, an Afghan national, entered the United States on a special immigrant visa on September 9, 2021, days after the Biden-Harris administration's catastrophic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. In some significant part, we need this administration to go through and ensure that the proper vetting is being done. and to get the job done correctly. I yield back.
Madam Chair, excuse me, I'm going to trust Trump to do the vetting on this. There's nothing about here that says you can't do vetting. There's nothing about here that says this is an automatic. You know, with this, basically, it extended the program to give more time for vetting and allowed more people to come in because a lot of people helped us during that war.
The program remains
And now it's being removed, and we don't even have the benefit of a vote or debate on the floor.
The program is being extended in the amendment. The authorization continues. The cap is just not raised.
The language would have extended it to 2027, Mr. Roy. So that's what this bill would do.
This extends it through through the end of this fiscal year.
Yeah, no, this would to 2027.
Right.
So there's a-
And so I'm just saying it's extended through the rest of FY '25.
Oh,
and the cap
It's
is
like,
not
it's
raised.
like the burn pit stuff. Thank you. I yield back.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
God almighty.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I ask for roll call, Madam Chair.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any further discussion on the rule? Hearing none, the question, hearing no further discussion, the question is on the motion from the gentlewoman from Minnesota. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The
Ask for
motion is
roll
agreed.
call, Madam Chair.
A recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?